The October 26th special meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education is called to order. I'm the chair, Christine Vitale, and I'm joined by Ms. Rotelli, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Pitko, Mrs. Gerber, Superintendent Cummings, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxicanelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Guernsey, and our student representatives from Fairfield Ludlow and Fairfield Ward High School, which we're so happy to have them back. They're like the stars of the meeting. With that, I ask you to all please rise for the pledge. Okay, we will get right to the student reports. Welcome. Thank you so much for volunteering. Why don't we start with our representatives from Fairfield Ludlow High School. I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then just give your report.
Okay, I'll start. Good evening. My name is Reed Childers. I am a senior at Fairfield Ludlow High School, and I'm honored to be one of your student representatives. The first thing I would like to discuss is that this Friday, October 29th, our school, Fairfield Ludlow, is hosting a Halloween parade and costume contest for seniors. It will take place outside as students walk around the track. As a senior myself, I can say that we are all very grateful for our school for still allowing us to engage in fun senior activities while also making efforts to be COVID safe. I think it's something really important. Similarly, in order to ensure that all of our costumes will be appropriate, our school presented us with a video on cultural appropriation during senior homeroom advisory. Many diverse groups of people discussed different Halloween costumes and reasoned on whether or not the costumes were culturally offensive. By providing our students with this kind of information, students will not only have to worry about their cultures not being offended, but overall our students will become more considerate and aware individuals. The next topic also relates to seniors and any stress they may be feeling as a result of college applications. I personally have a significant amount of November 1st deadlines, and these past few weeks have been full of endless applications. Luckily, Ludlow has made continuous efforts to alleviate any of that college stress. For example, Ms. Kobsa, our school counseling intern, hosted drop-in college application workshops in order to set aside designated time for finalizing or submitting applications, writing essays, or reviewing requirements for schools that students are applying to. Lastly, I would like to discuss a club at our school entitled Raising Abuse Awareness for Teens, or RAFT for short. This club's mission is to essentially fight against domestic violence and child abuse, as well as to educate students on the subjects. Last week, they organized a school-wide awareness day on Thursday, where they encouraged students to wear purple, a symbolic color used to raise awareness of the issue and show survivors that they are not alone. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Annika Martins, and I'm a junior at Fairfield Ludlow High School. I'm delighted to be present at this meeting, and I'd just like to build off of what Reed said earlier. This past Friday, the Falcon Council, which is a group of students who oversee school-wide activities at Ludlow, partnered with Griffin Health Services Mobile Vaccination Clinic to offer a day-long vaccine clinic at our school, which was very successful and received very well by all students and staff. Over the last 3 weeks, FLHS's Junior State of America Club, which is designed for bipartisan political discussions, has been running a voter registration drive ahead of Fairfield elections next week. And this includes talking to current staff and students who have not yet registered to vote. And their most recent event, if you were driving past town over the last weekend on Saturday, you'd have seen them with signs advertising that please come and register to vote. FLHS's Drama Club has been working hard every day after school to prepare for their play Lord of the Flies. They have 2 full casts, and they'll have 4 plays in late November. Regarding mental health, which is a concern that's becoming increasingly present in the student body, on November 4th, John Troutween is visiting FLHS on behalf of the Will to Live Foundation to discuss suicide and ways students can support each other. And on November 9th, the following Tuesday, representatives from an organization called Steered Straight will be visiting FLHS to discuss mental health, its importance, and why students should find effective coping strategies for challenges that they face. In conversation with students recently, there have been a few concerns I've heard regarding the lack of parking space at FLHS, particularly since there's a lot of new drivers, especially with online driver's ed, and the inability to use vending machines at lunch. That's just about all I have for today, so I'd like to pass the mic over to my friend, Mr. Sunil from Ward.
My name is Lynn Giosinil, and I'm a current senior in Fairfield Ward High School, and it's a great honor to be the student rep of Fairfield Ward High School. The opening of the new 2021-2022 school year has been a great success. We would like to highlight the Senior Dress-Up Day every Friday in the month of October, starting off our first Friday as Decades Day. The following Friday, we had Characters Day. Then last week, we had Careers Day. And to close it all off, this Friday, we have Halloween. Overall, the Senior Dress-Up Day has been a success.
Hi, I'm Emma Feckety. I'm also a senior at Fairfield Ward High School. I'm honored to be here. Last Friday, we hosted an activity fair during Block 3 in our main courtyard where a variety of our clubs and extracurricular activities were on display. Students were not only able to view, but were able to sign up to join these different activities, which is always a great way to get involved in our amazing school, especially with what we've been going through within the past few years. It's a great way to reconnect with our school.
Then this week, in our beloved Learning Commons, a student-run initiative known as No Place for a organized and facilitated an intentional act of respect activity, where we discussed about Fairfield Ward High School and talked about how we can make our school as a place of no hate. We ended the activity with the signing of the No Place of Hate School Pledge.
And then this Thursday, November 4th, the Will to Live Foundation will be hosting a presentation on suicide prevention to our student body. And to add on to that, our Ward entrepreneurship class is currently selling Spread Smiles Fairfield sweatshirts to, again, raise awareness about suicide prevention. And 100% of these profits will be donated to the Will to Live Foundation in Kevin Cooksoe's honor.
Earlier this month, the Fairfield Ward High School senior class had our first fall dance in our courtyard, which has been extremely successful. Soon, the junior class will have one coming up in the month of November.
And finally, with the November 1st deadline rapidly approaching for college applications, our College and Career Center has been doing an amazing job helping the students with college visits and financial aid presentations and being available to the student body for their college process.
And these are all our current updates we have so far. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope to see you next month. But before we leave, we would like to give a shout out to Officer Chance, our TikTok star.
Thank you very much for your reports. Mr. Asa, followed by Ms. Mastinelli.
Thank you, and I'm thrilled to see you guys back here. It's just one more thing returning to normal, so I'm psyched. Just a question about your sweatshirt sales for suicide awareness. If somebody does not go to Ward, or how would you go about supporting that cause and buying it if you're not a member of the Ward community?
I'm sure you can talk to some of the students who are organizing this event, and they can tell you some ways that you can support this whole event.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cavana. So on your website, there is a link and a form to order, so for anybody listening, thank you.
Mrs. Mastinelli?
Two things. First, likewise, thank you for coming. Thank you for volunteering. I did want to just confirm that all four of you were volunteers, though. Yes?
Yes,
None of the four of you got your arms twisted, right, Dad, in the audience? Right? Okay, just checking, Ms. Feckety. And then I was just wondering if you could, the one thing I didn't hear from any of the four of you were anything about the athletics. If there are any teams that are having any particular success at this point, or are you just waiting on the postseason results? If you happen to know.
At Ludlow, I can certainly say that we are still waiting on postseason results.
Same thing for Ward.
Any other questions? Osina, so you are welcome to stay. You're also welcome. It sounds like a couple of you at least have college applications you might still be working on. And actually, I'm going to play the mom. The weather is rainy and windy, so I think that you should head home. Unless you really want to stay at the Board of Ed, you're of course welcome, but get home safe. And thank you. We're looking forward to seeing you at our next meeting.
Thank you, guys.
Have a nice night. Okay, moving on to public comment. At this time, we welcome the public to give comment on agenda items only. It's 3 minutes per speaker. We just ask that you give your name and address for the record. If anybody would like to give comment, I invite you to come over up this time.
Both callers are on, Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Asa.
Katie Flynn, 204 Grandview Road. After reading the backup documents in today's agenda, I was both alarmed and frustrated. The red updated language in the backup seems to commit the Board of Education to further action on redistricting without a renewed public discussion on either the consulting company itself or the need at this time for renewed redistricting action. I hope that that does not happen tonight. I was here at the last Board of Education meeting in February of 2020. In the past 2 years, things have drastically changed in the Fairfield Public Schools. No one knows that better than you. One town hall or glance at our student data analysis shared this evening would confirm that to the wider community. Our community does not have the bandwidth, resources, nor the energy to focus on this. We need to be focused on getting, our kids' mental and academic health rebuilt first and above all else. We need to be focused on building a curriculum and supports that integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion daily across our entire district. We need to be focused on advocating for safe facilities. We need to be rebuilding, not breaking apart, now more than ever. Outside of racial imbalance requirements resulting from an outdated state statute, much of the rationale behind this redistricting either no longer exists or at the very least should not be at the top of the priority list for this board or this district. This is frankly not the time for redistricting. Our students and families have been told and seen a dramatic shift in focus on mental health as a result of the ongoing pandemic. I thank you all for that. That said, to at the same time be planning a huge and emotional disruption is counterproductive. Children are still in masks, children are still distancing, children are still quarantined, children are still suffering, unfortunately, and now they will be asked to do more to possibly separate from their community, their friends, and their support systems. It's simply unacceptable to do so. Until this pandemic is far behind us, which I think we can all clearly say it is not, redistricting planning should not be supported or continued by this board at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder for the public, we don't respond to just questions or comments. We just listen at this meeting. So anybody else want to come and give comment? Yeah, just press down when you talk.
Is it working? Okay,
It is.
thank you. My name's Jennifer Elwood. I live at 46 Bibbins in Fairfield, and I'm a McKinley mom. I'm nervous, so I'm going to read this. I wanted to speak tonight in regards to the academic data being presented, showing student performance by ethnicity. My comment is for the board, but also for other people attending or listening to this meeting. Data can be a double-edged sword because it serves as a tool to paint a picture. And depending on your personal experience or understanding of all the things that go into creating that data, you can come away with very different pictures. Our achievement data shows that our Black and Brown students have lower scores across the board academically as compared to white and Asian peers. They make up just under 47% of kids receiving special education services in our district. They are punished at a significantly higher rate than those same peers. The presentation also poses a series of questions about how all stakeholders can support our students in this area. And as we ponder our responses, I want to address the other picture that this data may have painted. How many people will look at this and see that our students are underperforming, that our students and their families are responsible for these results, that there's something wrong with how they are doing it? How many of us listening or watching may have thought, however fleeting this thought may be, sadly it shows that our kids just aren't good enough despite our best efforts. I want to be clear on public record that our kids are not failing school. Instead, it is our curriculum, instruction, and environment that are failing our kids. What this data clearly shows is that we are not meeting their needs beginning in elementary school and extending all the way to the rate we're punishing them in high school. Our programs and systems are not working for a large chunk of our population, and it is up to us to dig deeply into that and determine exactly where and why. As an elementary educator and math and reading specialist, I believe that the tools we use and the way we use them are a part of our problem. As a mother of kids of color in our district, I believe that our lack of education and anti-bias and culturally responsive teaching and learning is another. We all have roles in creating change for our kids as stakeholders in our educational system. I urge us all to listen very carefully to our inner voices as we move forward and to make sure that we are consistently pushing ourselves to pose the question, where are we failing to meet the needs of our kids and where can we do better?
Thank you. Would anybody else?
Hi, Cheryl Valerie, 108 Winnipogue Drive, Fairfield. I'm here tonight to speak about CRT. Basically, in it, all academics are taught through a lens of race. It's a belief system conceived at a workshop, and now it's being mainstreamed at a breakneck pace in schools. And now in Fairfield Public Schools, we're getting ready to use federal COVID funds to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion administrator. So I went to Public Schools website to find out more. And I've talked to some people on this board about this, and they didn't really see it or haven't heard about it. But this is what I found. Under equity and diversity, you'll see that the Fairfield Education Association has an anti-racism committee, and one of its missions, if I can get to it in fast enough time. We are teachers.
What agenda item you're speaking to?
Racial imbalance, superintendent's comments. We are teachers ready, willing, and able to transform Fairfield Public Schools into an anti-racist institution. From the classroom out, we cannot think of any work to be more important or more urgent. So that's interesting. We have to seize the moment, one once in an epoch opportunity to change the world by changing our staff, our policies, our curriculum, and our instruction. So that's that. And one of the other things they were saying was that they have to assist staff, students in becoming sensitized to the experience of different people in unlearning racist patterns, assuming that we just have them. And it's empowering them to interrupt racist remarks and attitudes. Section 4 of our Connecticut State Constitution says that we have the right to speak freely. So that's a violation of that. And they also have activities for teachers who are involved in this. One of them is to get involved with Black Lives Matter, which is a whole other thing. Reallocating the budgets by defunding the cops. That's you guys, right there. Let's see. Anger, a Black woman's superpower. And then it talks about 1619 Project, and it talks about the power of Martin Luther King's anger. Okay? So that's some of those things. If a teacher or any school administrator has any agenda beyond what they are specifically hired to take care of, to teach, what their accreditation is, what their certification is, and their job description, they have an agenda. And that's not their job. They're putting that above their teaching job. Math, writing, arithmetic, supporting students, but in what they're supposed to be doing, and not staying in their lane to teach and not...
Time. Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Would anybody else like to give public comment before we go to our callers? Okay, seeing none, we will go to our public commenters who are on the phone. Ms. Rotundo?
Hi, Marie Rotundo. That was very interesting. I was actually calling in to talk about the COVID-19 policy extensions. I am going to ask you not to approve to extend the COVID-19 policies, especially C19.2 health and safety protocols related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It gives the administration far too much leeway to dictate the health protocols for our children. We are parents and guardians along with the advice of our children's doctors, and we are in control of the health of our children. Our children are required by law to attend school. So if we disagree with the health protocols of the administration that they dictate, then our children will face disciplinary action through no fault of their own. This is an overreaching policy at this point. Right now, we do not need the COVID-19 policies for health and safety protocols. The health measures that were in place in schools pre-COVID are enough to keep our children safe at school. Please do not approve this particular policy. Thank you.
Thank you for calling in. Can we go to the next caller?
Hello?
Hello? Just please state your name and your address for the record.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Damon. I live at 348 Lakeview Drive, and I also am calling in about renewing the mask mandates. Specifically, over the summer, there was a Secretary of State filing on June 29th that merged the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents Incorporated with and into CAPS Education Foundation, which is now extending indemnities to our superintendents of schools all throughout the state of Connecticut. And interesting enough, there's a letter that was written by Shipman and Goodwin on August 16th, 2021 to the executive director of the now CAPS, which is part of the superintendent of schools, basically threatening to take away their federal funding if they do not enforce the mask mandates and if they support leniency on the masks. Connecticut, Fairfield specifically, did receive $2,879,294. I think our children's health, both physical and mental, far outweighs the amount of money that they're getting from the federal government. And I think that you seriously need to consider the health and safety of our children. The masks are not necessary. There is not one study that the CDC, FDA, or NIH can provide showing that it has any protection for our children. What it does show is they're collecting germs in those masks, making our children sick, and damaging their social, emotional health. So I am asking the Board of Education to put the money aside and not think of themselves. Also in the letter from Mr. Shipman, it specifically states that if the Board of Education, meaning the board members, are not consistent with these mandates, that they can be personally liable. So if you are going to enforce these mandates, it's only to protect yourselves and not our children. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's it for callers on the line. Any last comments to the public? Seeing none, we'll move on to presentations. World Language Course Proposal and First Read, American Sign Language. Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you have any introduction for this.
Excuse me, very briefly, Mike Cummings, Superintendent. Ms. Frankel is going to come up and speak to the presentation. As board members know, we've been talking about this now for, I think, at least a couple of years. It's part of the new graduation requirements that the state has instituted and go into effect for the current junior class, the class of 2023, includes that all students must take a one-year credit in world language. It's part of an effort to both meet that need as well as look at ways to expand our world language offerings. We've explored the idea of an American Sign Language class. We know that these are held in other districts, that they've become popular courses. So Ms. Frankel has done a tremendous amount of work in talking and working with colleagues throughout the state and researching this course to bring forward to you tonight for consideration the adoption of an ASL course curriculum. We do believe, as I said, and we feel that this would become a very popular course when instituted. Students who have already completed perhaps 3 years at the high school level of Spanish or French, Latin, may well consider this for a fourth year pickup, as it has a lot of use for them going forward. So, Ms. Frankel, thank you for being here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Eileen Frankel. I am the World Language Coordinator for the district, grades 3 through 12, and I teach 2 Spanish classes at Fairfield Ludlow High School. Thank you for allowing me to share this exciting opportunity with you tonight, as this new offering will open doors and add another perspective to the World Language program here in Fairfield. Let me first give you some background as to how the course was developed. Prior to the consolidation of the 2 high schools, Fairfield was a regional center with a deaf ed program. At the time, I was teaching Latin and felt the need to deepen my understanding of how to best support the needs of my deaf students. This allowed me to learn sign language and make many friends in the deaf community. When we talked about instituting an ASL program here, I was able to reach out to these people who I had met years and years ago. They then led me to other people. I've been in contact with ASL teachers in Connecticut and in Massachusetts. I've spoken extensively to the World Language Supervisor in Sharon, Mass., and the teacher there, as well as teachers in Wilton and Groton, Connecticut, and the Languages ESOS Coordinator in Greenwich. Everyone has been generous with their time, providing support, answering numerous questions, and sharing experiences. Introducing American Sign Language into the World Language program in Fairfield ties directly to our primary goal, crafted in 2015 when our new proficiency-driven curriculum was passed by the board. We presently offer 4 spoken modern languages, French, Italian, Mandarin, and Spanish, and 1 classical language, Latin. The addition of American Sign Language will prepare our students to be lifelong learners in an ever-changing global society, and will develop their ability to communicate effectively and to interact with cultural competence. As with all languages, American Sign Language has a rich and unique culture. In 2016, the Modern Language Association conducted a study, and in 2018, they reported that in U.S. colleges and universities, American Sign Language was and continues to be the 3rd most studied language after Spanish and French. In 2013, it displaced German. A lot of buttons here. By 2019, 6 of the 8 Ivy League schools, Brown, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, and Yale, included ASL as an option to fulfill their world language requirement for graduation. The list of universities which also accept ASL as their graduation requirement is long and includes UConn, Georgetown, Brandeis, and Holy Cross. These are all schools popular among Fairfield graduates. Of course, American Sign Language will also meet the state of Connecticut requirement for graduation, which requires 1 credit in world language. This requirement commences with a graduating class of 2023. Reflecting the exponential growth of college courses offering American Sign Language as a world language, high schools have followed suit with significant increases in ASL classes during the past 2 decades. The program in Greenwich is over a decade old, and the Wilton program began last year with 3 Level 1 classes, and it continues to grow. An exposure to American Sign Language will provide students with cross-cultural experiences, enable interactions with the deaf community, including deaf students in public schools, and provide career opportunities in education, medicine, real estate, hospitality, law enforcement, culinary arts, and customer service. Inclusion of American Sign Language in the continuum of courses in languages other than English may enable some students to obtain knowledge of another language and culture who may not have been otherwise able to do so with offerings from the traditional modern and classical languages. The ASL course, as all of our world language courses, is aligned to the 2015 World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, and thus is based on the 5 C's: communication, culture, comparison, connections, and communities. Within each unit, learners will be exposed to level-appropriate signs integrated with the exposure to a rich culture. For example, in Unit 4, learners will learn signs related to art, music, dance, and theater, and will build and reinforce and expand their knowledge of other disciplines, in this case, the arts, while using the language to develop critical thinking and to problem solve creatively. Similar to all of our world language offerings, the learners will develop skills to communicate with others, appreciate other cultures, and gain new perspectives as they deepen their appreciation of diversity. Our national standards are rich and develop critical thinking skills. Notice the verbs that are used: negotiate, interpret, analyze, evaluate, and reflect, among others. I also want to point out in the first bullet, which is the interpersonal mode, the standard references signed conversations, as well as spoken and written ones. There's no textbook associated with the course. However, we would need to purchase some materials for the teacher and to provide funding for the development of an implementation guide and assessments over the summer. The anticipated FTE is 1.0, which includes Fairfield Ward, Fairfield Ludlow, and the Walter Fitzgerald campus. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Ms. Frankel, for that presentation. Mrs. Gerber?
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. So when you talk about the 1 FTE and you mentioned the 3 high schools, so is the thought to have 1 class at each school and have the teacher go from one to the next? Would that be the goal, or?
I think we're thinking, just given what has happened in Wilton, that there probably would be more than 1 section at each of the 2 high schools. And so that one person would possibly teach 2 at Ludlow, 2 at Ward, and 1 at Walter Fitzgerald.
Okay, and what, approximately, what would this, is there a certain number of students, like minimum or maximum, I just didn't know if.
Contractually, in world language, we're at 110, divided by 5. So 20, 22, 23 students.
I guess my question is just, not knowing very much about sign language, I just didn't know if a smaller class size might be preferable. I mean, I'm obviously probably with almost any class, smaller class sizes is preferable, but I guess this specifically, I didn't know if this lent itself more or if it, it wouldn't really matter that much. I'm just curious.
I think as in all world languages, something more manageable in the low 20s is better than something like 25 or 26. So I think it's the same for Spanish or French or ASL.
Right, I guess just the thing is that this is a first year course, so I mean, by the time many students, when they're in high school, they've been taking this language. I know not all, sometimes they do pick up a new language in high school, but that this is brand new. So again, just learning something brand new, obviously smaller is better. But so I guess in a perfect world, your hopes would be to have 2 at Ward, 2 at Ludlow, and 1 at Walter Fitzgerald. And so if all works out well, that would be the goal. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Maxcanelli?
Yes, thank you. So just 2 questions. First, I was wondering if you had spoken with those other districts that offer this regarding the hiring pool. Is that something that, because obviously world language often is a challenging, and this is even smaller subset of that. Is that a concern?
In Wilton, they actually were very lucky. They had 2 candidates, both of which were excellent. The person they actually hired is dynamic. She's growing the program, again, exponentially. 3 classes last year of level 1, 2 classes this year of level 1 with 55 students, so that's very large. 2 classes of level 2 this year, and they're doing level 3 next year. So they were lucky. I spoke to the person in Greenwich. Greenwich has had some issues. So their program is older, and they've had some issues. I'm not sure where we had met, probably 4 years ago at a conference. And they were really searching hard. But as I understand it, because I spoke with her just the other day, you are in fact covered. But like all world languages, we could be really lucky, or it could be a challenge.
Yeah, I just didn't know if in those conversations you'd gotten some contacts and knew that there was a good pool out there, but obviously that will be for the future to deal with. My second question is regarding the 1.0 FTE, and I guess I'm unclear on why that's an anticipated increase when I would think if this is drawing that many students away from other languages, you might not have anticipated that this would be a 0 increase for the department.
I also spoke, as I spoke to each of the districts that I spoke with, I asked where the students are coming from. Are they coming from other languages? And not necessarily so. So some students are taking a second language or a third language because it's English, French or Spanish or Mandarin or whatever, and then sign language. For other kids, they max out of the world language. Some of our students only take 2 years in high school, and then they pick this up. So there's not necessarily one space from where they're coming.
Ms. Guernsey?
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. And really, I think that a course like this would be such a gift to our community. And what I'm wondering is, assuming that this course is the success that you've described, which I hope that it can be, what might the plans be to offer an American Sign Language Level 2?
I'm not sure that we've actually spoken about it, but I think it's very possible. We're advertising it. It's going to be in the program of studies as ASL introductory course. But I would imagine that if we have 50 students taking it, and just as in Wilton, they polled, you know, how many kids want to go on? And they did. And so they did the same thing this year. They're in level 2. How many students want to go on? So I would imagine we have that door open.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Cummings?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Ms. Frankel said. We would not consider this a terminal course. So if the interest is there, we would build it.
Ms. Rotelli?
Thank you. Just more of a comment. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for our students. My sister is a sign language interpreter. And I also think that for...
Does she need a job?
She lives down south. But I also think that for a portion of our students, language is very difficult. And this would be a great option for those of our students who struggle to learn a language but need to meet the requirement who may be much better learning visually. So I think this would be fantastic.
Can I just piggyback on what Ms. Rotelli? I agree completely. I mean, you spoke about the deaf community. My son has special needs, and just early on as a baby, sign language was one of the first tools we used for communication. So I think that is a gift for a whole other population of students in our district. So exciting. I would hope to see this grow. I'm wondering if you know of any districts that are offering it even in middle school as a language. But something to think about. Ms. Jacobson.
I had the same questions on leveling up and the accessibility point. But I'm wondering, does this qualify, should we level up appropriately in the future, does this qualify for the bilingual seal of literacy on
The seal of literacy?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
It does. It would. Okay. And how many levels does that take? You have to do 3? How many?
The seal?
Yeah.
You need to be at the intermediate mid-level.
Right.
Which some students are able to achieve after 3 years, some after
Right.
4 years.
3 or 4, right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? No. No pressure, Ms. Picco.
No, I don't have a question. I'm biased. I have a child with apraxia. I would love if every kid knew sign language. They could talk to my child.
Thank you. As always, if anybody has any other questions after the meeting, just forward them along to Mr. Cummings, and he'll get them to Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel.
Moving on to the cybersecurity audit report, Ms. Burns, Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you have any opening remarks before we
Just very briefly, I want to thank Ms. Burns for being here this evening. We, as part of the adoption of this year's budget, it was a board member's request, Ms. Jacobson, to invest in a cybersecurity audit of our school system, and Ms. Burns and her staff have done that, and Ms. Burns is here tonight to give us some of the highlights of their findings.
You just need to press the button on the mic.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Burns. I'm the Director of Information Technology for the district. I'm going to spare you the slides just because I don't want to disconnect the next presenter. So better safe than sorry. We did do an overview of the presentation in executive session, so I'm just going to talk about the highlights. One of the things that was found in the audit was that we have a staffing shortage to get some of our key components accomplished. So one of the things you'll see in the 2023 fiscal year, 2024 fiscal year budget, nope, I'm ahead of myself, whatever, you know what I mean, is a cybersecurity analyst position. In addition to that, So I was pushing to the left. I didn't realize it's the newfangled thing. Think that's better?
Continually.
All right. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Wow.
What a gentleman he is.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. In answer to some of the other issues that were raised, we do need to do more formal staff training to prevent phishing attacks and other types of breaches that could potentially cause ransomware and cost the district and the town funds. So we will be looking to acquire a formal training program that will work with administration to become mandated for all faculty and staff. As an aside, the students have a rather rigorous program that they go through that's age appropriate and guides from K-12 on being correct on the internet, knowing what signs to look for, digital citizenship and the like. So this would be a little different. This would be more focused on our staff. We are also going to be looking for better tools to help us be more proactive than reactive in looking for anomalies, things that are going on in the network, logs that report potential things that just don't look right or don't seem right, and give us an opportunity to discover those ahead of time and to do appropriate mitigation. And then there's also a request to increase the funding for some of our staff members who, you may not realize it, but our IT staff is in a non-bargaining situation, so they don't have regular bargaining reviews. And as a result of that, and most of you are well aware of the competitive nature of technology jobs right now, we want to be sure that we retain the best and the brightest, and we have some really great people working for us. So I'm asking for some recognition to some of the capacity to keep them in line and maintain those competitive salaries. Some IT department goals that aren't going to cost you additional money. We would like to participate in the creation of a data governance board. Mr. Cummings has discussed that with the district leadership team. That's going to give us answers to some of those control systems that we had talked about with the audit presentation. We have a lot of them informally now. Certain departments carry responsibilities for access to certain systems, but it's not universal. The IT department is very much in control of who has access to what in our information systems, Infinite Campus. I don't really feel that's an appropriate use of our department. It should be somebody in the instructional office and potentially some other department, special ed, for example. We do role-based permissions. However, there are adjustments to those as well. So that would be part of how we would address those issues. We'd like to create a template program to standardize our IT policies and procedures so that they're available to staff, they know what they're expected to do, and that we can use that also as a training tool. We'd also like to create statements of work for some of the development work we do. Right now it's a ticket request where somebody says, hey, I'd really like to see this data compared with that data, bar charted or comparative or whatever. And we don't really have a formal process of what does that statement of work really mean. There's a lot of scope bleed that happens over the course of those visualizations as we built them. And I think it's important for us to be doing the work of the district in a very economical and fair manner, and I think sometimes that scope bleed tends to make us get off track on other projects. So it's just a formalization of the process. And we'll continue to look at our staffing models, outsource where appropriate. We've really pushed a lot towards the cloud, using software as a service where it was appropriate. We moved Infinite Campus to the cloud this summer. So our major applications are now hosted elsewhere. One of the things that we were commended for in the audit is moving in that direction because it takes the onus of security along with the database controls into the cloud. So it keeps the cost to our district to maintain end user security without having to worry about the applications themselves. And I'll open it up to any residual questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for the assist. Any questions for Ms. Burns? Mrs. Max Cannelli.
I was just hoping you could characterize an overall assessment of the results of the audit in terms of as an overall positive, overall negative, just what would be the anecdotal summary?
I think overall it was a good result. We didn't have any major critical issues identified. We were given a B+ rating. I wish it was an A-. I don't know what we missed there. And the other piece of it that I think was good for my engineer and I is that we discovered that we really knew what our weaknesses were. It allowed us to refocus on them, but we weren't surprised by anything, and that was a good thing.
And then secondly, when it does come to be budget time, I do think it would just help, again, to adding further color to whatever ultimately is the budget request, if there could be paired with a comparison of, and if we don't. You know, just what are some of those worst case scenarios, because that's always the hard part about being proactive is you're not having to be reactive, therefore not realizing the price that you pay. So not for now, but at budget time, I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
And with dollars attached as well.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mrs. Max Cannelli. Any other questions for Ms. Burns? Ms. Jacobson.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you to you and your team for taking this audit under your wing. I look around this room, and many of the people are on technology as we speak here in this room, and we know that we've invested heavily in upgrading technology and for our students and staff, and that we need to take great care in the security of that for our district and our students. So I much appreciate this endeavor and look forward to what you think is necessary in terms of our enhancements to keep going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Jacobson, thank you for your advocacy and moving this forward for the district. Can't really speak to what happened in executive session, but just for the public to know that the board, as Ms. Burns said, was briefed in more detail than was given tonight. So look forward to supporting, getting us to at least the A-. I think that we all would even want, the A+. Let's aim high. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, please just forward them to Mr. Cummings, and we'll get them to Ms. Burns. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to student achievement data review. For the public, as periodically throughout the year, we get a data review. Dr. Rasmussen provided a video for the board, which we reviewed over the past couple weeks. The link to that video is posted with the agenda for the public. If you haven't viewed it already, I suggest you view it over the next few weeks so you're up on the latest student data trends in Fairfield. And with that, I will first give it to the superintendent for any opening remarks, and then we can bring the team up.
Right. Again, thank you, Ms. Vitale. There's a couple of things I wanted to say before Dr. Rasmussen comes up, and this piece will actually have two parts. It's both revisiting Dr. Rasmussen's the presentation he put together, but also giving the board opportunity to ask Mr. Mancusi questions about the data he supplied this evening as well. But first, just a couple, I hope will be quick comments. the district has been asked why we're really looking at these issues around bias and anti-racism in the work we are doing. And the data that's presented tonight begins to answer the question of why. It still leaves a lot of questions still to be answered, actually a lot of questions still to be asked. But the question of why we're doing this, it really gets at the heart of the supports our students need to be successful, and the and how we're going to. And by successful, I want to be really clear that we want to make sure that when we think about student success in Fairfield Public Schools, and this is true of all of our students, that we're thinking about that both in terms of their sense of belonging to the Fairfield Public Schools community, as well as their success within the Fairfield Public Schools community. And taking a broad definition of that success is more than just their GPA or achievements on an athletic field or court. It's really those things that are going to carry them forward as they go past their graduation, right? It's that embodiment of really what our vision of the graduate is about. I want to thank the board members who submitted questions in advance, and we worked really hard. Well, some of us did. I basically supervised that. That in responding to the questions and getting those answers together for you. And we're going to touch on some of those questions as well. But I think it's really important that board members know that as you ask these questions, it provoked further conversation and further research. And there's going to be, luckily for you, another set of data essentially that will be shared with you in response to your questions. Dr. Rasmussen in a minute is going to share one piece that we looked at, and I'm going to ask him to talk to that specifically. Also, so you know, our intent is, we shared this with the district leadership team last week. We're going to revisit with them on November 4th this presentation with the idea of how do we now bring this back and forward it to the staff? How do we develop essentially a professional learning presentation on this information for the staff? Because this data is crucial for our collective work going forward. The data is really new to us. These questions were really sparked by so much of what we're learning over the past couple of years. Certainly the pandemic has reframed some of the information and questions that we've traditionally asked. And the data shows that the questioning, I think the data definitely shows that the questions have gotten deeper and more difficult, which is what they need to do. Some things we know. We know that the disparity between subgroups of students in the Fairfield Public Schools has been happening over a number of years. We know that COVID had increased that disparity. We know that measures of achievement for all students has remained relatively flat. We know that every staff member wants what is best for our students, and every staff member is doing the best for those students. So the system is producing the results it is designed to produce. Right? The system is working at peak efficiency to produce these results. So when we think ahead of what we need to do, it's system changes that we really have to look at in order to initiate the changes in our student achievement. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight, certainly further when we begin to talk about the district improvement plan. Some things we may also surmise. We need to examine practices, protocols, and policies throughout the school system to determine what needs to be changed. Changes need to include not only instruction, curriculum, professional learning, and resources, but expectations, and most importantly, our culture. We are challenged by the needs of different learners. Incorporating the SEL and equity work to broaden our approach recognizes the needs of these different learners. We are being far more reactive and not enough proactive, and we are inconsistent. And some questions we all must answer, and these are questions that Dr. Rasmussen included in his presentation, and I'm going to add one to that. What can all teachers do to fulfill the mission? What can all of our administrators do to fulfill the mission? What is the role of the community in fulfilling the mission? And what is the role of the Board of Education to fulfill the mission? And the question I'll add is, how will we develop a new district improvement plan to respond to these challenges? We want to come back to this information frequently, and as you have seen, and we'll talk about again towards the end of the meeting, when we talk about the DIP, these were the same, many of these data sources that Dr. Rasmussen reviewed had come up as part of the District Improvement Plan Steering Committee as things they wanted to have further understanding of as they began to do their work to develop the 5-year plan. So I'm going to ask Dr. Rasmussen to come up, talk about this one particular slide, and then what I'm going to ask him to do is we tend to, when we have these data presentations, we tend to jump to the SBA data, we tend to jump to the STAR data, we tend to jump to those kind of headline pieces of data. I'm going to put in front of the board for your consideration the following, that, and I'm going to have Dr. Rasmussen just quickly go back through and look at the discipline data, the attendance data, the class placement data, because these are the pieces, those are our leading indicators to what the SBA and the STAR data are telling us. If we don't start to fix those things, we're not going to see improvement in those test scores because we don't have students in class, or students are feeling disengaged, or students don't feel that they have that sense of belonging and are on a path to fulfill the mission of the Fairfield Public Schools. So, Dr. Rasmussen?
Thank you again for having me. It's welcome to come in front of you and share ultimately this more information, because ultimately data is just information. It's ultimately the people behind the data. That's the one that I shared a quote with you about that. And ultimately is that takes data and puts it into action, what ultimately then leads to our focus on our students. And Mike correctly kind of went to, I'm just going to skip forward. This is the same presentation that I went through on the video. I'm not going to go, I'm skipping ahead. Again, you're getting a replay. Come on. And the reason why Mike correctly, Mr. Cummings noted was our focus really want to get beyond just looking at the what they call the lagging indicators, which would be the summative assessments that we take throughout our system, the Smarter Balanced, the SAT, the NGSS, and other different assessments along the way. Those are really what they call lagging indicators. That's really what happens at the end. But when we want to get more further in depth, instead of providing metrics, really kind of getting at attendance. We can look at the specific attendance rates related to, I mean, like right here, like the green, really kind of highlighting the differences throughout the years, but ultimately it's similar, but it's also telling a story how different subgroups are doing related to attendance. And it's not a hard concept to understand. If a student is not in school, learning becomes more difficult. And the state defines chronic absenteeism as a student who was out more than 10% of the year, or 18 days. So ultimately, this actually was spurred by a question by a board member, is like, how can we look further in depth into this in terms of overall attendance related to by level? So then I started digging into it even further. And again, the more data just asks more questions, and the more questions leads to more investigation. So ultimately, this is how I broke out the percent of students chronically absent by level. This is something I really started getting into based off of a question from a board member. It's really kind of highlighting here how the different levels, this is based off of last year, in terms of what was the percent of students that were chronically absent. This may be an indication, again, I'm not drawing any conclusions, may be an indication of the different models of how related to how we calculated or determined if a student was in or out. Again, more than 18 days. So you see the jump from middle to high with an overall district percentage around 16.5. So I found this very interesting. Was now when we kind of related this back to some of our student achievement data. Remember, we're talking about a leading indicator possibly leading to results of a lagging indicator, and we heard that result in question from the board about why do we see student achievement drop. I mean, so this started asking that question, and one of the responses I had back to that was then I correlated student achievement based off of all the different grade levels and compare the two difference, and it was starkly different. So again, I mean, again, not a hard concept. If the students weren't in and engaged in class, well, student achievement suffered. And then I actually started going down, again, this is something I literally was going into just recently. What I asked to start the question, this same breakdown, what if I broke this out by ethnicity just like it did across the board? And here, how are different subgroups at the different levels in terms of how they were, in terms of chronically absent. So finding this information out, I mean, I was startled to kind of see why, again, keep on asking the question why, like Mr. Cummings says. Why are we seeing more students based off of subgroups more chronically absent, especially as they went up into the higher levels? And again, I don't have the answers. I don't have the answers here. I'm not intended to find the answers. And again, the data is just an entry point. It's the entry point to kind of ask more questions. Are students not engaged in terms of, again, this was a one-year picture. I don't want to draw more conclusions off of that. But again, if I follow across, start asking that question, why? And also, so these leading indicators are really important to understand that ultimately these are things that we can control as a system to better support our students related to their learning. And similarly, this kind of, again, our report into our suspensions rates, kind of looking at those was an important aspect of our students belonging to school. So again, seeing differences across the different subgroups. But also seeing, to me, this was seeing this data right here, kind of showing the different enrollment, where our students feel that how they're going into the various classes, college prep, honors, across all the four different main core 4 subject areas. Again, asking the question, if things were equitable, we would see a more equal distribution of students across our schools going into each of these different courses. So again, asking the question, okay, keep on asking why. What can we do better as a system? Similar to when I kind of showed this data to you here related to now our high needs. Remember, high needs is defined as explicitly any student that can be any one of the 3 categories in terms of 1, free and reduced, 2, special education, or 3, our English learners. So again, seeing about 30% of our high schools in terms of being identified as one of those 3, 1, 2, or even all 3 of those categories. But seeing also the enrollment kind of patterns related to that. And lastly, the same thing, kind of going into showing the same thing. So it's not just a high school problem. This even goes back to now when students are recommended going into the middle school in terms of an accelerated math program. Is the system now creating these possible inequities down the line? So that's why, and showing this data to you was, it's our opportunity to start asking questions. To ultimately go back to our mission to do what's better for all students. And lastly, ultimately kind of sharing out, looking at this is what they call a prevalence rate, which is now what percentage of students, say, of our Black and African American students are identified as special education, and seeing the stark differences between those. Again, keep on asking the question, why? So ultimately, this is where I really want to keep on picking up, is going at more at not these, the summative, the lagging indicators, but how do we now kind of focus in on the things that maybe we can have a little more control of beyond just curriculum? How can we now focus on some of these other aspects and kind of see what's kind of, as it builds the bigger picture, and all the courses that I teach in terms of using data to drive instructional improvement, you always ask, what's the story? What's the story the data is telling? And that's where I'm going to kind of take a step back and open it up to you in terms of some of the questions you have. So keep this in mind, that we're doing this work for ultimately going back to our mission related to that. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll take it to the board for questions. Ms. Jacobson?
Are we just asking questions on those slides or the whole presentation?
No, you can certainly ask questions on the whole presentation. We just didn't want to spend time going back through the whole thing.
Oh, so we're not going through the whole thing. Okay. I have a couple.
We can call up a slide.
May I ask one question before we get started? Is that what's happening with all the questions we submitted?
We have, we're going to go over some of those, but we were not able to respond to all those questions in time, so we're going to put all that together and get it back out to you. And as I said earlier, we definitely believe that this is worth revisiting as a conversation with the board. But there are multiple, I'd say that we've probably added another 8 or 10 data pieces already in response to board member questions. So it's going to require more time, both to get it together and then also discuss with you. But Dr. Rasmussen can go over some of the questions that we have tonight, that you've asked previously.
I apologize, Mrs. Jacobson, but if it could start with whichever questions can be answered, because I know I wouldn't want to just repeat something that I've already written, and as someone who didn't get them until Sunday, I definitely understand if it's not ready for tonight, but then I don't want to ask it. So I don't know if it's possible to just turn it back and say, what can we get through?
Yeah, if you want to go back
But,
to the
and again,
beginning.
and I took the microphone from Mrs. Jacobson, so I apologize for that, but.
Over just some of the data information that I have. I mean, I could share out some of the information anecdotally without, because I don't have my QP right here in front of me to put it up, but ultimately there's some data on here there was some very important information in terms of some of the questions that led us to further investigations, like for example, then also tied to student achievement. We're actually seeing the achievement of students that were chronically absent and not chronically absent was starkly different. But but there's a lot of other questions that we can, I don't know, explicit, I don't know which ones you.
Slide 9, I think that was the first question.
Yeah. I don't know. So the first slide that actually kind of where the board members kind of went to is slide 9, which was really asking the question about the question was if the report is not intended to make any conclusions about the impacts of student learning via COVID, can you please clarify if it is important to differentiate the impact of pandemic versus other general impacts on student learning? Well, ultimately, kind of as we kind of highlighted the responses, it's important to look at, I think, in both contexts. Kind of because, I mean, the presentation I provided you last spring kind of looked at more specifically honed in on some of the COVID kind of issues and how things that we've been approaching to support, but also kind of also looking at but seeing it in a greater context, I think it also adds to the story. So it's important not just look at it as one in isolation, but ultimately the story of how are our students achieving. So ultimately, that's where that one kind of went towards, specifically towards that, and how do we best support our students in COVID and also, but in general, moving forward across the door. So other questions related to slide 9, related to, not try to make too much information related to COVID. This actually was a state recommendation, especially with all the various learning models and various aspects. So ultimately, that's why we kind of really talked about that related to kind of differentiating this at a bigger picture and why we also wanted to look at the data in terms of a 4-year pattern. Ultimately, when we want to look at the data, we want to take more a general approach other than looking at a single COVID. So looking at this slide, one would kind of look at, I'm just kind of highlighting here, did we see drops Here, yes, we noticed drops, and that's something specific in both in ELA and also mathematics was seeing the same thing, seeing the drops related to here, and here. But this also kind of even went towards some of the information that I just provided you in terms of the percent. A lot of the data now is saying is that a lot of the drops could be related to some of the attendance of how students were attending in the various models. We had the two different models related to in and out, alternating days compared to where students were coming in both in two different, but coming in every day at the elementary school. So there was some of the data now is coming back is saying maybe that model was a better approach in terms of being able to support, especially when they come in every day. But knowing that in terms of and COVID, I mean, it's something that we continue to learn on better what's best for student learning in terms of keeping students engaged in terms of the structural design and the system related to that. The next question after that went to slide 14. I'm sorry, I can't see what number slide I'm on, so I'm just being honest here.
Dr. Rossman, if I can interrupt, just
Yep.
on the topic of slide 9, the two questions that were at there that were targeted on that were because of a statement in the
Yes.
slideshow which said that the goal of this presentation was to identify areas and that the goal of the presentation was not intended
Yes.
to make any conclusions about impacts on student learning via COVID-19.
That was correct.
And so, and yet we are clearly seeing the impacts of COVID-19, whether it's due to how it impacted attendance, how it impacted teacher instruction.
Yep.
So,
But I think what also was not, we can't just look at COVID in isolation. It also is part of the larger picture, especially for a lot of the various subgroups. We not only we still have and saw we still have an achievement gap across the board for a lot of our subgroups. So looking at, and COVID wasn't ultimately the cause of it. It goes back even further. So that's what the intent of the presentation was. Like we needed to take a larger view, not to make isolated conclusions around just COVID. So that was the intent for that.
and right. So, and I understand that there are two very different directions of this, and we as a board are interested in both directions. Yes. One is the impact of COVID-19. That drop, that fourth column, is COVID-19, whether it is because it contributed to a 10% increase in chronic absenteeism of all students, or any of those other data points. And the reason we want to talk about that is because we want to hear more then about what are the strategies that the district is taking to address learning loss. And that is a direct COVID-19 connection that we do want to hear about, and that is for all students. So I do think it's a valid point that this is COVID-19 related.
Yeah. And
additionally, we are absolutely getting a phenomenal picture of the achievement gap. And so these are two different directions that this data presentation is taking, and I don't think we can ignore one for the sake of the other. We're interested in both conversations. And so both of the questions submitted regarding slide 9 were to that point of, we are learning something about an impact of COVID-19, and so we want to hear more about that because we then want to connect it to that here. What is the district doing about it? And again, I know an answer will be forthcoming, but just for the sake of the public. One thing that I submitted was about, this is the big score. What we know you have is phenomenal information on strand information. It's not just a math score. That is broken down much more, which then provides us more information. And how are we targeting that? And I accept that that's going to be a future answer. But I just want to be clear that there are two stories here, and we can't ignore one for the sake of the other, that it's all of both.
Yes, we can't ignore one or the other. But ultimately, we wanted to take a larger picture, not just looking at, well, we could have gone up here and just presented just how 1 year to the next, how our students did related to achievement, ultimately related to COVID, but ultimately the data suggesting that it runs deeper than just looking at the COVID data. So ultimately that's, taking that view, the isolated view, they need to take a bigger picture, because as the data says, it's larger than just COVID. I mean, COVID, I think, actually created a greater lens and focus on some of the greater issues that are currently going on in our district. The question here was asking what efforts are being made to better understand the overall needs of our current 6th and 7th graders, especially for the math, related to, especially, again, going back to the COVID, how are students performing? This is something we continually monitored throughout the school year, always talking to our teachers related to what best and what supports do our students need. One of the things in my conversations with teachers is we're seeing probably almost a similar or back to normal in terms of the things we're doing. This is something goes a lot of the professional development related to focusing on acceleration versus remediation. There's techniques that you can do in the classroom that really focus on more how do you accelerate students and so they're prepared for grade level content. Things like spiral reviews, doing related to instructional strategies to help prepare them for incoming lessons. A lot of this actually came out of some of the lessons that came out of Hurricane Katrina. Some of the best ways to better support students, instead of just kind of starting with a deficit model, more of related to a model that was more supporting and them to be successful on the grade level content. So in a lot of the conversations specifically for math, the 6th and 7th graders, now the 7th and 8th graders, so a lot of the teachers are doing a lot of different strategies on grade level to get them, and so we're back to the, how do I say, quote unquote, expected curricula in both those grades.
I would add to that, just last week, and I think to partly answer your question, Ms. Maxon Kelly, just last week, Dr. Parrish was meeting with the middle school administrators, and they did a data review of the strand data for math in across grade 7. They looked at the past 3 years of success at each of the schools. They broke that down, and we basically went through the Atlas protocol looking at where success took place, what were potential issues around, what were commonalities across the 3 schools, right? What were outliers across the 3 schools, and taking that, asking the administrators to go back to their buildings and begin to work with their 7th grade math teams around what was going to either change or be amplified in their instructional focus to address those needs. And that's just an example of similar conversations that Dr. Savichensik's had at elementary, using the data to determine next areas of work.
The next question refers to slide 27. It is about attendance in remote versus in-person days. I'm not sure if this is a high school question or not in regard to the students who were home in the different models on one day versus the other. We currently do not have the data broken down by this. It will take some more time. I don't know if there's any further information from the board in terms of that question. The elementary school, you'll remember, were in school every day essentially for a half a day, whereas the high school were back and forth. Or if this is a question in regard to students who had chosen a remote model for the whole time.
Ms. Jacobson?
So we did have to report last year everyday attendance for a model that they were in. So either they were in or they were in their remote model. So my question is when we looked at that attendance, the state, we had to report that. The state every month gave a remote day versus in-person day attendance. So when we break this down even further, do we know that more not attending happened on the remote days than the in-person days? Which I presume the answer is yes, but that you have looked at that.
We are currently looking at the numbers at this point. We didn't have them for the presentation.
But we had to submit that every year as a district.
Yes, we did. Are you simply, if you don't mind me asking through the chair, are we asking about the attendance for remote or the achievement as a result of it?
At this point, I was looking at the attendance.
We can most certainly get that data.
Right. So I wasn't talking about the RLA that were full remote and how they did comparatively, because I understand what you're saying. So just to clarify. So, okay, so if we could just see that going forward. So that was my question. I won't interrupt your flow here. Go ahead.
The next question is similar to, also on slide 27.
Do you have a follow?
What's the asterisk mean?
The asterisk means the data is suppressed because there's too few students in the category that can then show who they are for public presentation.
My second question is, there's no way to take data on students who showed up remotely but didn't turn their cameras on.
We would not have, we did not track that by teacher level, so no. The next question asks on the same slide whether or not truancy was looked at as a contributor for this information. Again, we don't have this number currently. Just for the public and the board's comment, truancy is a different indicator than the chronic absenteeism. We would have to go through the month's attendance as well as the years. It's 4 unexcused absences in a month or 10 in a year in order to disaggregate those students against their achievement as well. We can get the truancy number, though, without a doubt, as an attendance rate without correlating it to the achievement scores on the slide.
Any other questions on this slide while it's up? Ms. Jacobson?
Not necessarily on this slide, but on the attendance issue, if that's okay. So I know that we used the term that we were startled by some of this, but we couldn't have been startled because we knew this in September of last year, right? We knew every month that our high needs population was chronically absent. We knew that, and we knew by school, and we knew by grade. So this wasn't really a surprise, right? I mean, we knew that was the case.
We are able to have the leading indicator as it contributes throughout each of the months. Obviously, students become chronically absent at different times throughout the year, but we do know this information as it's occurring.
I don't know if we've been able to look through September and maybe up to date in October. Has a lot of that been remedied at this point? Are they back to a substantial degree at any point as of right now?
We can, when we answer this question, we can get those numbers. I don't have them with me tonight.
I'd be important. So one of the things that we did do, if you recall, is that we did the policy, right? Because we knew this was happening, and we created a new policy for chronic absenteeism by subgroup population. Before it was just district and by school. So I'd also, at some point when we revisit this, be interested to see if that is being utilized, if it's been proving to be helpful. How do we envision that being operationalized going forward so that something like this can be addressed in the moment? Rather than what happened here. So that was my only thing on chronic absenteeism. Christine, thank you.
You can move on to the next question.
I believe this one is specific for 6th grade math placement recommendation and parent override percentages by gender and subgroup. Ultimately, the day that I was provided to answer this question, we didn't have it separated by subgroup, but ultimately that is something that we do track throughout the school year, especially if they get later in the school. It's a little too early still. Well, the data that I provided was a data that was based off of some how we followed how students were doing related to parent override going from 6th and going 5th into 6th. Ultimately showing that all students were at the A or B level. So it's ultimately showing that the students do rise to the occasion. So.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's super important. So I'd be looking at, interested in the historical trend on recommendation versus override and how that panned out. My question is for this year, knowing what happened last year, and I'm hoping I get the answer that I want, but did we see a drop in our transition to pre-algebra enrollment from 5th into 6th, or moving forward into that pre-algebra in grade 7 than we typically would see pre-COVID? Meaning, do we have less students now on that track than we did previously, or are we holding solid in that number?
I don't have that data on me right now, but based off of my recollection, when I do that analysis in June, we were right par where we usually were.
For the enrollment for this year?
Yes.
Okay, so we didn't see a significant drop despite, okay, that's good news. All right, thank you so much.
You can move on. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Mascanelli.
Just one follow-up. I share Mrs. Jacobson's view that I'm glad to see no drop, and yet we know they learned less. We know they achieved less mastery. So what kind of position is that putting our 6th grade teachers in, where they have a student body who are not at the same level of mastery that they customarily are?
I would actually, I don't know if I could actually say that statement is true. If you actually look at some of our elementary achievement data, especially math, it was almost on par to where we usually were in other years. So I don't know if I could actually.
Yes, I'm going solely by, obviously, I don't know anything about internal assessments. I do know the SBA scores.
Yeah, but I mean.
And the SBA scores point unequivocally, we went down.
Especially in 6th, 7th, 8th, but this would have been, our current 6th graders would have been in 5th grade prior. So, I mean, our 5th grade, I mean, I can actually probably call Mr. Wakeman, he probably knows the scores better than I would, but ultimately, our elementary numbers are very similar to what we've done in the past, based off of a lot of the various things, so.
Thank you.
Ms. Jacobson?
I'll follow up. It was one of the questions that I had submitted, so I don't know if you were getting it to it, but it's similar to Mrs. Maxon-Kennelly's on, for those grades where we did see a big degree of change. The question that I did submit was, for our teachers, not only are they customarily used to having a variance within that classroom, but now that variance is even greater, especially at the middle school level. So I don't know if that's an answer that you can give right now, but I want to make sure that those teachers, and all teachers, of course, but we know that there's an issue in middle school, right? We know this now. How they're being best supported, and those students, because it's hard, right? I mean, one of the things that we had happen here was that our non-high needs group dropped, right? So the ones who don't have any high needs, those are the ones that dropped as well. So making sure that that doesn't continue, right? So we're meeting that need while also everything else. I mean, it's hard. It's always been a hard lift. It's even harder lift now. So that's food for Mr. Cummings, perhaps, for the next time we put this on, which I hope will be soon. But now's the time to address that, not in April. So I'm hoping that either there's an answer for that right now, because it's an even harder place than it was.
Ms. Jacobson, I heard the question. I'm wondering if you could just restate it for me, because I do have an answer to that, but I want to make sure that I'm answering the question, as I understand it, is the question of how teachers are responding to, to paraphrase what you said, right? It was always a challenging issue, the diverse needs of learners in any one section. But the assumption being that diversity is spread out even further now as a result of the past 18 months, especially in middle school, right? And so the question being, how are teachers responding to that?
Right. Not only how they are responding, but how are we supporting them in that if there is a need somehow that's greater than before? And I'm not saying there is. I know what the difference in the classroom looks like, but how... What I want to make sure is that top group, the non-high needs groups that did have a drop too, are also being met, while they also have this greater differentiation, so that trend doesn't continue as well. So it's a really complicated thing. And our middle school teachers have higher classroom sizes. They have the greater gap in there now. And this is for all teachers, but really, I'm very concerned on middle.
It is true of all teachers. I would say to you that one of the things that we hear from teachers at all levels is, by no means am I dismissing the concerns around the academic differences. I think teachers at all levels are dealing with things that they have to acclimatize students to schooling, right? The expectations of schooling. If you talk to kindergarten, first grade teachers, kindergarten teachers are seeing what happens when students don't have exposure to preschool. If you talk to the middle school teachers, they are dealing with behaviors that they normally don't have to deal with, and the same thing is true of high school students. And I'm by no means am I characterizing all students as having difficulties, but the number of students who are having these issues has increased. And that presents, to your point, an even further challenge to meeting the academic needs of students. And I think it contributes to the levels of stress that our staff are currently under. I think if you talk to staff, there's a general acknowledgement that things are certainly better than they were, but they're not yet where they once were. And so much of this is kind of the catching up, right? The catching up that they're dealing with. I would say to you that the general approach we take to addressing where students are and the focus of our work this year is revisiting the work that we had started prior to March of 2020. And that was the work of essentially it's a primary focus of using student work to identify what the instructional teaching point should be. We are encouraging through the use of grade level meetings and team meetings at the middle school and PLTs at the high school collaboration around that, but for teachers to help identify alone and together how what the needs of students are and how they should best address those. And that's just, it's ongoing, constant work. There's you know, this is essentially the use of formative assessments, but I don't want anybody to walk away with the feeling that these are formalized formative assessments. It's the work that students are assigned in class and how people are using them. The principals, the administrators in the building are deploying at the secondary level, well, specifically to the middle school level. Our administrators talk very highly of the work that the SRBI coordinators, the position that the board supported a couple years ago and put in place at the middle school, are in supporting the teams as they address these needs, doing, you know, reallocating resources into classrooms where they're needed, and providing interventions when appropriate. These are all things that the middle school right now is better poised to do than they were a couple of years ago, very fortuitously. But it also still is a learning experience for them to be able to do this. So I think that there's no common answer because every situation, every classroom, and every kid is different. But I think it really comes down to the individual focus of what student needs are, and I think our teachers are doing what they can to address this, but we as administrators in the district and at the school level have to continue to monitor what supports they're going to need to be able to do that. And I will tell you, I think one of the things we're trying to do through the administrator work is just increase our presence in the classrooms in order to better understand what the issues are.
Thank you for that follow-up. The ARP, the after-school tutoring program.
Ms. Jacobson, I'm just going to cut you off for a second. Ms. Maxon-Canelli had a follow-up to Ms.
Yeah, that is a follow-up.
I actually think I was going to ask a similar question, so
okay.
I'll follow her because I think you were going there, Ms. Jacobson.
Sure. The after-school tutoring grades 6 through 12, I presume that the identification to be invited to that programming was simply a not meeting indicator. And all of this?
Well, no, it was the schools identified a number of data sets. One of them was SBA, star scores, grades. This was happened at both the 6 middle schools and the high school. So they identified several data sets that they could begin to address to identify students for the after-school program.
And do we have a accounting at this point of ratio of invited to accepted?
No, we are. Here's where we were going to talk about this in a little bit, and I know it's one of the questions that came up in the presentation questions. right now, we are struggling to find staff to staff those after-school programs. I will tell you, I talked to Dr. Parrish today. I think right now Tomlinson is ready to begin their work next week. But the other two middle schools are struggling to get staff to do that. We've had to make some modifications in our expectations for the number of students who can go into that. Getting staff to commit to those couple hours after school per week right now, it has been difficult at pretty much every site.
So that accounts for our 20% allocation under the American Rescue Plan funding. So if we aren't able to execute on that 20% in swifter manner, how would we reallocate those resources to in-school programming to meet that same percentage requirement?
I don't know if it's going to be in-school programming as a result of that. I mean, because the other issue that you begin to bump up right against is some districts have gone the route of attempting to hire additional staff, and there's no additional staff. So I think that one of the conversations that superintendents are having and other staff are having across the state, and I'm sure beyond the state's borders, because it's not just a Connecticut issue, is that with this 20% requirement, the ability for districts to meet it through staffing is strained, so strained this year, or at least right now, that may not be possible. I think for the middle school and high school, and this is just preliminary conversations because we certainly haven't given up. We've been spending about a month on this, but we may have to look at additional summer programs. We may have to look at additional ways to reach the needs of these students going forward. Because again, right now we're at a supply and demand issue. And that's severely impacting our ability to deliver the services.
I think the reason why I asked about in-school hours is that the summer programming and the after-school programming not only are challenged by what you're saying in terms of staffing it, but it's also a voluntary nature. So we've got some issues. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would just say to you, I think what then we have to look at, and this certainly is a program with merit, is, but it addresses one problem, but it doesn't address the 20% issue, right? Is to say what scheduling modifications need to be done at the secondary level with intervention periods or things like that that would accommodate those needs. All right. I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Ms. Mascanelli.
So one question and one follow-up to this slide. So not for now, but I would hope we were going to get an update soon that as we dig down on this analysis, is that how is it prompting the allocation of funds to be modified? You know, as we're identifying needs, we're moving from this to that. I would just hope we'd be apprised of that.
You will be.
And then my second question to Mrs. Jacobson's point of in building, I know last year to meet the demands of staff who were not present in the buildings, we frequently had situations of teachers being bumped from a 1.0 to a 1.2. Could that possibly be a means of allocating some of these funds to do it within school, that not because of a teacher leading, but simply to have an additional instructional support, that would be a means of doing it during the school day with existing staff, since we already know there's a certain willingness. Now, again, before it was helping out a colleague, you know, someone's gone out. But this could be a different angle on that.
Excuse me, certainly is a possibility, Ms. Mascanelli.
Okay, moving on.
The next three questions are really around the elementary school, slides 30 and 31 for the most part. The first one is whether or not this data has been broken out, or what the district is doing regarding breaking this data out by elementary school to evaluate our schools. That is occurring internally in the district. We do know the 11 different sites and what their scores are in the aggregate, as well as across grade levels, which is interesting in that sense as well, 3, 4, and 5 for Smarter Balanced. The results are inclusive of students who are full-time remote or hybrid last year. We do also agree that in the early elementary grades, or all the elementary grades, it is the time to begin to address the disparities versus waiting for middle or high school to catch it early. The next question that naturally evolved from there is whether or not some of these special education identification numbers could have been mitigated essentially through a more robust SRBI process or a more aggressive SRBI process. Although we can't have actual data with that, we do agree that always improving our processes, whether that be tier 2 and 3 or the tier 1 curriculum and instruction, can mitigate referrals as well as students entering into identification for special education at those levels.
And I would just follow up to that, that I think that question really speaks to the heart of this issue that we are concerned about around expectations and culture.
My apologies, we're just trying to group these together. Give me one moment.
While they're grouping, want to just add my comment in terms of, for this presentation, I think after the last year and a half, that all students are high needs at this point is when we're looking at this. We just have to keep that in mind, that all students are high needs and coming to the table with needs that they didn't have pre-COVID, which I know this board is very sensitive to, as well as the staff. But to Mrs. Maxicanelli's point that we're looking at, there's 2 stories here, equally, and the questions I think the board submitted captures both of those stories. So I thank you for taking the time to look at the video beforehand, submitting those questions, and looking to continue this conversation with a deeper data dive in future presentations. Because student achievement that is our job, and to support you in making the classroom a robust learning environment, while also making it a loving, warm, nurturing environment. And I think in looking at the data, you guys ready? I'm going on and on. I can keep on talking, but I'll stop if you're ready. Okay.
Thank you very much for that,
You're welcome.
assistance along the way.
You're okay.
One of the questions related to kind of continuing to monitor our last year's 9th graders and then under our current year's 10th graders using the STAR assessment. We did provide that data in terms of overall how the students kind of progressed, started in 9th grade. We do not currently have 10th grade STAR data. Number one of the things that was one of the things that actually was cut out of the budget last year. And so we do not have STAR data for our 10th graders.
I think that was one of my questions,
Yes.
and my question was about the data from last year when they were in 9th grade.
Yes.
So we have that here.
We provided to you, so you can see the distribution of what percentages were exceeding, meeting, on watch, intervention, and urgent intervention. You can see those percentages, how they kind of play out throughout the entire 9th grade. So that is provided.
There's a question around whether Summer Boost targeted the 6th to 7th grade drop and address, or whether or not the Summer Boost was indicative of addressing the deficits. We do not have any data at this point from Summer Boost to indicate that the program addressed 6th to 7th grade deficits. Remember, it was built last spring. Smarter Balance came out, just for context, in late June. So in the planning of it, what I'm saying is we didn't necessarily plan with those scores in mind last spring. We have a number of data charts that are forthcoming and ready to go. We would just have to pull them up if the board wishes for a summary on them right now. At this point, they are in regard to suspensions disaggregated by actual subgroups, SPED prevalence rates by ethnicity, and NGSS particular domains with that. So that data is forthcoming within the next presentation.
It is a question for the board. I don't remember the exact count, but I think there must be at least half a dozen to 10 different data presentations that were sparked, data compilations that Dr. Rasmussen put together, sparked by the questions the board asked. And so my question to the board is, looking ahead on an agenda, we can get these out and go through a similar process of putting them out, collecting questions, and if we wanted to look at this at either the November 30th or December 14th meeting, so that you had time to truly spend some time with it to ask the questions. And I imagine it might spawn another set of, Dr. Rasmussen has told me that he would be interested in doing this job full-time if we would so employ him. But it really is very powerful. You know, you've asked some really great questions, as we talked about, and it's been very powerful as we've dove deeper into this. But if that's for your consideration, then we can get this back out to you, essentially create another Google Sheet to collect your questions, provide the responses, and then go back through them at one of the next couple meetings.
Yeah, given the time and being that the new data charts were not noticed to the public, I would prefer just putting it to another meeting so we could have it out there to the board to ask follow-up questions, and we can put it on the future agenda. Ms. Jacobson.
Just to request, if possible, that when the next set is created, that it be blended into the current existing presentation so that we don't have two separate kind of presentations on the same topic. And then I assume that the questions to the answers to the original questions would hopefully be available by that next point.
And we will include this with these responses collectively with that as well.
Thank you very much.
And to follow up on that, just in terms of posting this on the website, is it going to be on the homepage, on the data page, the academics page? If you don't have an answer right now, just
I
think
think
about
it's on the homepage.
Think about where you want to house this for the year, being that it sounds like there's many more data presentations in our future, just so the public knows where to find them.
I do believe we put this, I asked that this be included on the homepage because of its importance.
Thank you. Ms. Mascanelli.
And it was also referenced that a whole other data piece that wasn't part of this at all, and which is fine, we had plenty to chew on here, were the AP scores. And that would be something for either November or December?
We can include that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Zavichansi, did you write that all down?
I've got it all.
Great. Before he walks too far away, I just want to thank Dr. Rasmussen for putting this together, because this has been his work for the past 3 or 4 weeks. He's gotten support from the other program directors, who I thank for being here as well tonight. But really, it was his collection and his questioning and his finding information and then further questioning that resulted in the presentation you got tonight. And then, like I said, your questions have sparked even more for him. So I just want to thank him for the constant work that he's engaged in.
I echo that thanks. And thank you to the board for taking the time again with presenting questions beforehand. All right, moving on, racial imbalance plan update.
Christine, are we going to be able to talk about?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Rob's
Yes.
data?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Rotelli. Also posted with student data was the special education update on just some of the data for that. If anybody has any questions on that, we can have Mr. Mancusi come up. Thank you, Mr. Rotelli. I apologize. So this is enclosure number 2, special education data collection, September 2021. For those looking, Ms. Rotelli had asked for this information last spring. We've referenced it a number of times this year. I thank Mr. Mancusi for taking the time to bringing it all together. It has just some information about our students with disabilities in terms of counts. This sheet might also come in handy later when we do the quarterly review. And with that, I will bring it to Mr. Mancusi. I don't know if you have any opening remarks, or we can take it to the board for questions.
There was an additional question on the questions asked tonight from Mrs. Jacobson that I got away from me the day. There is currently, you asked for the current numbers for outplacements and settlements, I believe. Those numbers are 80 and 58 as of today for this year. Just, I can give a brief summary of the information that was requested initially by Mrs. Rotelli, and then, you know, we discussed what information would be helpful for the board. You'll see it's the number of PPTs held across the district over a 5-year period, as well as the evaluations that have been completed during that period in terms of initial evaluations, because it's one of the data points that the state monitors us on. You also have IEP counts of students over a 5-year period, a breakdown of all disability types, K-12. There's a year-by-year comparison with Fairfield. And the state, currently, our prevalence rate for special education is below the state average. It has typically been below the state average since I've been here. But like the state average, it continues to rise. You have 504 information there over a number of years, as well as tuition and settlements, and then over a 3-year period, the different outside evaluations that we've completed through the PPT process or through parents requesting independent educational evaluations through the PPT process. If there's any specific questions relative to this data, I'd be happy to answer it at this time.
Any questions, Mr. Talley? Ms. Maxicanelli?
Well, again, I submitted questions for this, so if answers aren't ready, then I'm fine with waiting for them to be given to us, but I did submit them ahead of time.
Yeah, I have not had an opportunity to answer those, but I will.
Mr. Talley?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mancusi, for putting this together and your whole team. I know I did request this over the summer, and I know it's taken quite a while to get all of this together, and I appreciate it. Now, can you just clarify one thing for me? So I know that the evals on the bottom of the page are outside evals, right? Those do not include evals that are done in district?
Those are in addition to evaluations that we do in district.
So, I mean, typically speaking, in my experience anyway, in most cases, if someone's requesting an IE, the district usually offers to try to do it in-house first. Do we keep track of that data on how many in-house evaluations we're doing?
We do. I don't have the number of independent educational evaluations that we have completed over the past couple of years off the top of my head right now. Those would be in that bottom number. Those evaluations, outside evaluations, those are, PPT generated, whether our PPT members and parents agree to a certain evaluation, or parents disagree with our evaluations and request an independent evaluation at public expense.
Right, but there are times when our own employees are doing, say, speech evaluations and reading evaluations?
Most of the time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. We will request an additional evaluation, for example, in the area of literacy, if we feel that our evaluations need a more in-depth look by somebody with greater qualifications than us.
Thank you. So when I asked for this data, I had something in my head that I was gonna, prove a point with this, but I gotta say, this speaks for itself. We continue to see an increase every single year. Some of the numbers are more alarming than others. Clearly, our outplacements went up significantly over the last year, especially seeing our middle school outplacements doubled from 2019 to 2021, which goes back to it all bleeds into our last presentation, and knowing that we've seen such a decline, specifically in middle school, those numbers are, cause for concern to me. But most importantly, especially, and this is going to bleed, my comments are going to bleed sort of into the last presentation we had as well, because to me this is just a huge piece that we're not talking about. We talked a lot in the last presentation about student achievement, and students weren't engaged in class, and so student achievement suffered. But it's not just student achievement, it's the student mental health. And just this last week, there was a national state of emergency for mental health on America's youth declared by the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and Children's Hospital Association. They put an urgent call out to policymakers at all levels of government to treat the mental health crisis as the emergency that it is. And some of the stats in that article that's gone out now in a couple different outlets, just because I think it's important to be said, because I don't ever hear anybody talking about it. Between March 2020 and October 2020, for children ages 5 to 11, they saw a 24% increase in emergency room visits for mental health. For children ages 12 through 17, they saw a 31% increase in ER visits for mental health issues. They saw a 50% increase in suicide attempt-related ER visits among girls aged 12 to 17. Okay? Now, in the first 6 months of 2021, the Children's Hospital Association saw a 45% increase in the number of self-injury and suicide cases in ages 5 to 17. And when I look at this data, and I listen to the data from the last presentation, clearly we're seeing the impacts of COVID-19, and we're seeing it in learning loss. But honestly, we're not going to get improvements in our children's achievement until they feel comfortable, and we need normalcy to stabilize our kids so they can go on and learn and be in a comfortable learning environment and be in a place where they can learn. I've spent a lot of time talking to parents and social workers and psychiatrists and directors of private schools in the district where some of our children are outplaced, and they are making and accommodating additional cohorts for children with anxiety this year because the demand is so great. So there are things we could be doing right now. This call on the national state of emergency was asking for policymakers at all levels of government, but there are things that we can be doing. People who are in positions to make decisions and advocate for children have to advocate for what they're seeing, and it's not like we're not seeing this here, but yet I don't really hear anybody talking about it. So I'm going to continue to advocate for these kids. We could be making changes immediately to make these children more comfortable in school and bring normalcy back to their learning environment so that we can continue to see. I don't know where I wrote it. I was jotting things down as I heard. We said we were using student work to figure out what instruction should be and figure out what the needs of students are, but it's not just their work. It's also just what they need in school to function. And their environment is so much a part of this. So it's not, and I'm not just going to completely tie it to masks, but it certainly is. When we're seeing children suffer with anxiety, and our first part of our protocol for that child suffering with anxiety is to isolate them and send them home, that's a problem, because that's not what you do for children with anxiety or panic attacks. And if we're not going to admit it, the first thing we need to do is admit that this is actually a problem and acknowledge that this is actually a problem so that we can help them. And then we'll be able to see these numbers go up. But until that happens, I don't think we're going to see any of this data get better. In fact, I think we're only going to see it get worse.
Ms. Pickup?
Mr. Mancusi, I have a question under evaluation types for 2021, 2022. We have listed psychiatric, neuropsych, literacy, communication, and for middle and high school, we have listed other for 23 students. What would other fall under?
Those might be including like some specialty tutoring or consultation about a program overview or review. That might be a hearing evaluation, anything that's not listed in there. Most of those others are, consultations around reading at the
I guess the reason why I ask is most students who've been in Fairfield Public Schools since elementary, they get some kind of identification in elementary. So for 23 students in middle school and high school to get a different one, I'm just concerned. Is it something other than psychiatric, neuropsych? It doesn't fall under all these other ones, so I'm wondering what 23 students needed for.
It's 23 evaluations, and that might be multiple evaluations for one student or consultations. I'm going to have to clarify that number. That number is accurate, just what that number consists of. It is different from the other evaluations listed, though.
I guess the reason why I asked is we have 55 students in middle school and high school who got psychiatric evaluations. Is the 23 a combination of some of the other ones? So I'm trying to get an accurate
The
portrayal.
23 is.
In other words, is it really 78 students with a combination?
No, it's not. It's 23. Specifically what it is, I'll have to get back to you.
Can I just have a follow-up on that, Bonnie? Mr. Mancusi, and Ms. Fratelli and I met with Mr. Mancusi and went over some of these numbers originally. I had asked the question if there was a delay in some of these consultations due to the closure in March to June, that is it skewing when the evaluations would have taken place? Like if we were in school in the spring of, 2020, would they have happened then and not been showing up in the 21-22 school year? Or the 21-22 school year?
Yes, when we closed in March, all evaluation stopped, so there was a backlog. So when we opened up, but I will tell you, the rate at which we're doing outside evaluations, it's not slowing down right now. But yes, in March, it did stop, so we started last school year with a backlog that we had to get to.
Okay, thank you, just for clarifying. Follow up on that.
I'm curious if any of the settlements or outplacements would also include number of students who were experiencing anxiety, but their parents just chose to withdraw them and put them in like a uterolateral placement or chose to pay for outplacement themselves.
Am I understanding the question to say that did our settlements go up because some parents may have chosen to place their kids unilaterally?
Or is those numbers in here? So if someone chooses to outplace their child and pay for it themselves, is that number in here?
The only numbers that
who
are
we're
in
paying
here.
for?
The only numbers that are in here are for settlements that we're paying for or we have a cost share arrangement for.
Okay.
Mr. Telly?
Thank you. I just also want to say that when I approached this and asking these questions as a parent who's been involved in special education since my child's been in preschool, which is now a high schooler. So it's been a long time. I wasn't approaching it from the perspective of a new family who's been struggling for the last year and a half and don't know the steps to take. And it occurred to me, because over the last 2 weeks, I've been approached by 3 different parents who were telling me stories and asking for advice on their children that were having pretty severe anxiety issues. That there was one common theme between the 3 people who approached me, and it's that they're not in this data. The children are not identified. They don't have 504s. They don't have IEPs. They're just children who, are struggling with anxiety and for whatever reason haven't been identified by the district or brought forth to their parents to request these meetings. And I will say in 2 of the cases, the children were this close to school refusal. So we can have some serious, serious issues going on with children who the district would have to make some severe and quick reactions to those kids potentially not going to school and providing an education for, who aren't even in these numbers in any way, shape, or form, which is quite frightening. And will continue probably to get worse.
Any other questions for Mr. Mancusi? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mancusi. And just for questions that were submitted by Mrs. Maxon Canelli, can we just... Thank you. Okay, moving on, racial imbalance plan update, Mr. Cummings and Dr. Parrish. Start with you, Mr. Cummings.
Okay, we wanted to, the reason this is on the agenda, let me take a step back. The reason this is on the agenda is the district has been invited to speak before the Legislative and Policy Committee of the State Board of Education next Wednesday, November 3rd. That meeting takes place at 8:30 up in the State Department of Education offices. It is at the committee level, not at the full board agenda as we've done in the, in front of the full board as has happened in the past. But essentially their request is to update the racial imbalance plan of the Fairfield Public Schools. When we were originally scheduled to go back to them, we were last there in September of 2019. We were originally scheduled to go back in September of 2020, October of 2020, and they put us off. They put off any of the school systems that are working on racial imbalance plans due to COVID. They put us off because of COVID. We've now been asked to go back. And essentially what they're asking us to do is just provide an update on where we are. So the plan in front of you is not substantively different than any plan, the plan that you've approved. It basically, Dr. Parrish worked to update the data that was in the plan, and that is denoted in red type. But there's been no change in the plan itself, the components of the actual plan. And we're going to share that information with the state when we're up there next week and hear what they have to say. And we'll, obviously after that, we'll be coming back to report to the board on their expectations for next steps. So if there's any questions, we can answer for you tonight.
Dr. Parrish, do you have anything that you want to add? Or did Mr. Cummings sum it up?
He pretty much summed it up. There were just updates to some of the minority breakdown in terms of McKinley versus the district, our pre-K enrollment. There were a couple other sections that were updated, but all of those, as Mr. Cummings noted, are indicated in red text.
Thank you. Does the board, Ms. Jacobson?
First question is on page 4. I'm interested in, you updated the capacity for pre-K, and I'm just curious why the capacities vary for 1920 to 2020 and then 2021. Like they were 30 for 1 year and then 32 for the rest.
So these were based on the information that was provided to us by the principal of the ECC. So these were the capacities that were listed that they actually utilized at that point in time. For last year, the capacities were a little bit higher, although they did not fill the seats because of the COVID restrictions in terms of the mitigation strategies we had in place. But in terms of the two student difference in the capacity, I'm not sure as to why there was that change from 2019 to 2020.
And so I don't, okay. And then just enrollment. So when you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, so Stratfield's capacity is 32, that consists of two, like the AM and the PM. That's not 32 at a time. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But the enrollment is 19 for both AM and PM?
Correct.
So when we add this up and we do a utilization, was it not possible to collapse some of these because we're operating at a pretty close to like 54% rate?
I'm not sure if that was part of the, discussion when they were looking at the enrollment. I know that Ms. Bruno looks through making sure that there are a certain number of peers that are in each class, so they have to make sure that that's accommodated in each section as well.
Okay.
I
I won't
wanna
go
add-
further on that, but go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add, and Mr. Mancusi, correct me if I'm wrong, but because that's essentially rolling enrollment, right? As third graders essentially age into right. What did I say? Talk about data. Yes, as the 3-year-olds age into the program, essentially, space is left open for them. And I know when I used to work with preschool enrollment with Ms. Peruzzi in our central office, we would be enrolling students throughout the year. I'm sorry.
That October 1 count or something, right? But even if you look at the year
Correct.
before, I mean, maybe that was weird because, I just had some enrollment questions on that, but that's for another time. The open choice students, so I can't find right now because we only had digital versions, but we took our additional 30 students that we had planned for this year. However, in this update, it says that 25 of them are at the elementary level in total. So if we took 30 and presuming we still had some elementary that were, there from before and not new, does that mean we placed a majority of those 30 new students not at the elementary level?
Can you share where you're referring to? I don't see that number.
The issue is at the elementary level. So I was just wondering, we did take mostly elementary students out of that 30, correct? The new ones? That information's-
There definitely were some additional elementary, but it was at middle and high as well. So it wasn't exclusively at elementary.
Okay. Why not all element? Is that because it would have increased a section maybe or something? Because
Yes.
that's where we're doing this for part of racial imbalance, right? To address that. So
Correct.
I'm just,
Ms. Jacobson, we knew last year when we approved this that we had approved them for all 3 levels, though.
yeah, but I'm just curious if it seems awfully small. 25 out of 100 are elementary?
There was quite a bit of
Yeah.
conversation around this topic, including why it was so little at the elementary, and it was because of space available.
Okay, thank you. So the next number is so at the bottom piece, you guys, I'm talking about, understood the first paragraph where we were when the pandemic hit and whatnot. So I know that you're only giving this to the committee level at the State Board of Education, but in September 2021, the Board of Education engaged SLAM. We didn't engage SLAM, the Finance Committee engaged SLAM.
The Board of Education, representatives of the Board of Education,
Okay,
the
it
Finance
would-
Committee.
Okay, so to be clear,
Represents-
this board did not engage SLAM. The Finance Committee engaged SLAM.
But
I would argue with that the Finance Committee acted on behalf, the Board of Education engaged it. Mr. Cummings engaged them. The Board of Education as a whole. We didn't discuss it as a
Right.
a long-term topic, so I'm not sure what yeah, I mean.
Thing
No,
is,
we did at the board level discuss needing to get in our facilities discussion, not in terms of the racial imbalance, of needing to consult with Milana McBroom about getting updated projections, whether or not plans that were presented a couple years ago are still viable. And we had discussion at the board table that we were going to be bringing them to the Finance Committee to start these discussions and then bring it to the board.
oh, you were informed that you were bringing them, yes, but I mean, at the.
No, we.
Yes, no, we did not discuss it. We were informed that that was what was
And
happening.
during the budget presentation, we approved funding to do another 10-year projections as
Right.
well.
So I'm allowed to comment on this update. Thank you. The next sentence about us using these new updated enrollment projections this year to discuss or renew redistricting proposals and act upon them. That's not a conversation that we've had. So is that conversation, Christine, what you want to happen right now with this update? So I'm just, if this was on here for tonight, knowing that you were going up to the state, is this on here so that we have that discussion right now? Because we didn't discuss doing that this year in terms of acting on them and coming up with new redistricting plans. We didn't say that that was something that we wanted to do given the situation that this district is in right now.
Want me to comment on
These are proposed. Over the next year, this board is going to be discussing this racial imbalance plan and going back and taking up work that we had left on the table. Discussing the future of where students are going to be situated in terms of facilities, the racial imbalance. I foresee that being a discussion that we're going to have this school year. And I think that based on the discussions that we've had at this board table in terms of information that we need to have. We need to know, looking 10 years from now, we're talking about renovating a school and spending $50 million, knowing where our population is going to be of children is important. So yes, I am envisioning us having those discussions this year. Am I envisioning us talking about redistricting right now? No. In terms of a plan moving forward tonight, no, we're not talking about a redistricting plan tonight. Yes, Ms. Pitko.
So to piggyback off of what she's asking, have you been having these conversations at the Board of Ed Finance Committee, but not with the full board?
We, as reported at our last board meeting, having SLAM attend the Finance Committee to talk about whether or not we need to redo all of the work that we did in 2019-20 when we started those discussions, and that was reported at the last board meeting.
Okay, reported, but
And
the
this-
committees, and I mean all committees, discuss something and then bring it back to the board for us to vote on. And I just want to make this very clear because you and I have had this conversation many a time.
Ms. Pitko, the Finance Committee, and Mr. Asa and Mr. Peterson can speak, made absolutely no decisions or no plan of action for this year.
Christine, can
Mr. Peterson.
Can I take over for a minute? Can I ask through the chair to Mrs. Jacobson, are you really objecting to the language here, that there's kind of a definitive?
I am objecting to the language, yes.
Okay. I don't know, I guess this is a question for Mr. Cummings, if this is something that we can massage here. Because it does seem to me in this discussion that, and in my first read of this, it does seem that we're committing to, in that particular paragraph in September 2021, that we're going to do this. Whereas the section, introduction, the introduction under Section 5, says the following steps will be considered. So I wonder if we can kind of head this whole thing off by just massaging the language a little bit. Leaving that there, I would also say that to Ms. Pitko's point, I actually have an update prepared for our committee updates. So like this is coming as a little bit of you're being a victim of the agenda order here. I certainly would be happy to talk about that now if it's relevant now, but the way I'm listening to this, I think it's more an issue of the language, because as Ms. Vitale said, I think these are absolutely things that we will be discussing in a broad capacity, but not necessarily. I know there are members of the public who are concerned that we're committing to a redistricting this year, which I don't think that we're doing, but it seems to me that we are going to have talks that will bear on a future redistricting discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Massacanelli?
Personally, I read that last paragraph very differently. That in having a discussion, which we need to pick up from March of 2020, well, basically from February, that the idea that being reviewed and acted upon, that doesn't say an effective date. that this could be effective 2024. It says nothing about when the plan would proceed. It could be based on a building issue. It could be based on anything. But that we are picking up the conversation again is something I think we all expected we were going to need to do at some point in this school year. So I just want to say that I had no problem with this wording, again, because it doesn't say for a plan effective when.
Okay, so I still have the floor, and doesn't matter when the effective is. The point is that engaging in any time, energy, or oxygen around this issue, given the plate that we have and that what our community has gone through, and you know very well what this does to our community. You know the oxygen that it sucks out of the air, and we have some serious work to do that we should not spend a breath on this, as far as I'm concerned at this point. And that's my opinion, and you can disagree, but that is, I don't think that this update should say that we are committing to this at all. And this is not something that we voted on, and this is not something that we took a sense of the body on, which we can do right now if you would like to do that.
Ms. Jacobson, respectfully, this is an update to a plan that the Board of Education has an approved plan. And our approved plan is said that we are going to explore options for redistricting. Prior to closing on COVID, that is what we were in the middle of doing.
Right. And did you bring forth an amendment and say, did we bring forth a conversation?
I thought Mrs. Vitale had the floor right there, so why don't you let her finish?
Okay, well, there's a lot of interrupting going on.
This is an approved plan. We are putting forth data that updates of enrollment and a continuation of conversations that we were having pre-COVID. We have talked about wanting to pick up the work that we left. Does this, as Ms. Maxson-Kennelly stated, does this say that we're going to be putting forth a redistricting plan for the end of the year, or for next year, or for 2 years from now? It does not. But it might come up as discussion over the next year. And it might come up for discussion in a variety of contexts. We're going before town bodies in a week, 2 weeks, to talk about buildings.
Yeah.
Capacities of buildings, investing potentially, upwards of $30 million on a new school, and knowing what our district might look like in the coming years is important information that we need to have, in my opinion, for that facility planning.
All right, well,
and based on conversations that the board had during past discussions on budget, we put money towards that, understanding that this work is still before us. Ms. Jacobson, you have the floor.
Thank you. Getting an enrollment projection in order to have that kind of a conversation is different than having an enrollment projection in order to act upon a redistricting plan. Number two, before you did this update and included this language in here for this year, was it ever a thought to earlier put on an agenda item, do we want to amend this rather than just providing this update? To get input from the full board prior to the meeting with the state to say, is there anything that we want to change or amend at this time rather than just picking up the ball where it was, given everything that has happened?
Mr. Cummings and I had a discussion about it, and I don't remember if Mrs. Gerber and Mr. Ace were also privileged to that, but redoing the redistricting plan, totally rewriting it, takes time. It takes board time, it takes staff time, and right now, which is not something that we're discussing tonight. So in terms of where staff time should be, and the board's time should have been for the last 2 months, it should be on our students and what's happening in the classroom right now. And that's where the focus
The answer was you didn't think about bringing forth an idea for
No,
input
I
on
didn't. I
amendment.
did not
Okay.
think that right now, given what was on the board's agenda in terms of time and in terms of the work that the staff has before them, that having staff focus on rewriting a racial imbalance plan that, if memory serves, took a significant amount of time to write the original plan, was the best use of our time, especially since they were just asking for an update on our current plan.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate this not being represented to the State Board of Education, that the Board of this education is on plan with this update. Thank you.
I will share that there were objections to the plan as stated, but this is still the approved plan of the Board of Education. Ms. Rotelli.
Thank you. I just want to, as you go into this meeting, I do think it's important for you to know, or for you to express to the State Board of Ed that not, as Ms. Jacobson said, not all of our board members have any interest in redistricting or having a redistricting discussion at this time, given everything that we're dealing with right now and coming out of the pandemic. So I just think, I mean, who's going up to the state?
Mr. Cummings and I, and Mr. Asaf, he's free, but it's the day after Election Day. And I will share that, and in our last correspondence with the state, we were clear that we were not looking to redistrict, that our focus right now is, making sure that kids are okay in the space that they are currently in, which is another reason why I didn't bring a redistricting proposal before the board tonight, because we're not there. We're not there right now. Right now, we're focused on making school a happy and safe place for students where they are at this particular moment. And that is where our energies are, and from the conversations we've had at this table, where we want our staff's energies to be.
And I'm saying this because I have watched, I think, the presentation, I don't know when it was, 2 years ago, and I know that it's not a comfortable place to be. And I remember from that meeting, they gave you a hard time about the racial imbalance and lack of improvement from our district. So I know that it's not going to necessarily be met easily for you to say something like that to them. So, and I appreciate the position that it puts you in.
Thank you, Ms. Rotelli. And I don't think it's going to be really that difficult to share that right now our focus has been on just getting through the pandemic, and that we haven't spent time on redistricting. We've spoken about it in terms of our facilities utilization, that we know that it's something that was on our plate and most likely will be on our plate again, but we have other pressing things to deal with right now, like getting through the pandemic. Shared it here publicly, the State Board of Education. If anybody's listening, there's our feeling on it. Save us a trip up there next week, but yes, Ms. Jacobson.
If that's the case, then why is this in this paragraph?
Because we might be discussing for this school year, in terms of our discussions, looking forward, what our district might look like and what are our redistricting.
When you say right now, you mean like in this moment. You just don't mean like this school year.
In this moment. Ms. Pitko.
I'm just going to add a comment about the plan. It was originally adopted in 2016 with improvements in 2017. You have at least 2 board members who were never here for the initial vote. Yet we've brought this up a number of times, referencing back to a document that was not voted on by everybody sitting here. I'm just saying that as we move forward, that maybe whatever new plan we come up with should be voted on, because we are the ones that have to stand behind it.
We'll take that into consideration and work that into future agendas. But there are a lot of documents that this board references and operates under that not all 9 of us have voted upon. Any other questions on the racial imbalance plan update? Okay, moving on to, thank you, Dr. Parrish.
You're welcome.
To the district work plan 2021-2022.
Thank you. I know this was on the agenda a couple weeks ago, and I apologize I wasn't able to make that meeting, but we wanted to make sure we covered it tonight before we were too many more months into the school year. I presented the plan tonight to you in the form of a timeline. This is a little different than it's been done in the past, and really it's for purely selfish reasons. It helps us organize the work as we go forward, and Dr. Parrish, Dr. Savichanzik, Mr. McCusey, and I meet weekly to plan our level agendas, our professional learning with staff. So this helps us kind of stay on track and make sure that we're clicking the boxes. Essentially, what we've tried to be as comprehensive as possible in the work. When I formulated it, I began to work with the ideas that were presented to you in the Art Besser grant back in July. So you'll see those components. I tried to group them somewhat around organizational pieces, student bases, curriculum, instruction, and then there's a big category of other. Again, the point was to be as inclusive as possible. Some of these things are going to take an awful lot of time. Some of these things will take less time. But in order to keep everything in front of us, it was really important for us to make sure that we inventoried the work as much as possible. I'm sure that as soon as you see this or others see this, they're going to say, well, you forgot about, and we're going to go, yeah, we did. So I'm planning on coming back to the board and presenting this throughout the year to give you an update. What I did highlight since you last saw it was I highlighted in yellow the areas that could be potentially impacted by the substitute issues throughout the district, the staffing issues, things that we're going to require staff to come out, professional learning opportunities for staff, curriculum development pieces for staff. Those are all pieces that are under some strain right now as we wrestle with the substitute issues. So that may impact the timeline on delivery for some of these items. I know Dr. Rasmussen, in particular, he and Mr. Wakeman, as they bring forward the math curriculum for your review soon, and they're in the final stretches of pulling that together. This has potentially impacted them most of all because they're under the most ready deadline. But Ms. Holcomb and Dr. Swingler are here as well, and as they're doing the K-12 work, the pre-K-12 ELA work, this is also impacting their work. I mentioned to you that the CREC work that we were doing on equity, and just to give some perspective, this is not an issue that faces Fairfield clearly, because the CREC work that on equity that we were going to send people to had to be canceled because in the districts they're working with, those districts aren't able to find subs. So that work itself has been delayed. So these are all, we're finding other ways to approach the equity work. The data presentation that was shared with you tonight, as I already mentioned, will be shared with our staff. And that's certainly a way to address the equity work as well. But these are just potential shifts in the plan as we go forward. So with that long-winded introduction, if there's any questions I can answer about the plan, please.
Any questions for Mr. Cummings? Ms. Guernsey.
I don't know how much detail we want to get into at this point, but I have a lot of concerns about the middle school block schedule work and the timeline. I just, after seeing the data presentation and knowing the impact that has been made on these students, these specific students, I have a lot of concerns about moving forward with a block schedule, which is an enormous disruption. And it also, as it had been presented previously, it was a schedule where students are losing that daily repetition of subjects.
We're going to give you a further and a more detailed update on the middle school schedule. I will say to you that the plan has been revised from what was originally sent a couple of years ago. But I would also tell you that the information that we have from our high school and their move to the block schedule that every other day approach to some of those subjects has not had an impact on student work. And the schedule that we are in the process of developing has opportunities for interventions for all students in all classes, rather than a single intervention block. So we reacted, the administrators, staff are reacting to the concerns that were raised by the last presentation and making changes as a result.
Thank you. The other question I have about that is related to the professional development that would be needed. I mean, you've blocked out these other areas because they were problematic. So how is that different for the middle school preparation?
Because the middle school preparation for this, the professional development can be self-contained in-house. So it can be done as part of the Tuesday after schools, the early release days, those types of things. Certainly one of the most, when you talk to the high school staff, one of the most profound experiences they had was piloting the schedule prior to its implementation on a couple of days, making adjustments as a result of those pilots. So again, it won't require, all those efforts would not require substitutes.
Ms. Jacobson.
I'm just circling back to the after-school grade 6-12. I know it looks like we were supposed to start this in November, and I understand you're saying that we have staff challenges around being able to do that. At what point will you say we're going to reallocate part or whatever we can't fulfill of that $500,000 in order to do something different?
We're going to likely have to do something with that soon. I know, as I mentioned before, Tomlinson is getting ready to move forward. We may have to, we have to regroup around with the middle school and high school principals to make a determination as to do we try to do something with the program, or enough students, there's enough staff to at least pull some students together for this, and then reallocate some of that funding. But that's something that's going to come up at the November level meetings as we go forward.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, moving on. Approval of Honors College Prep Environmental Chemistry course. That the Board of Education approve the Honors College Prep Environmental Chemistry course. Can I have a motion? Ms. Jacobson, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any questions about? We received a presentation on our last meeting. No questions? Take it to the public before we vote. Any members of the public would like to give comment on this course? I invite you to come forward. Okay, seeing none, back to the board. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Okay, moving on, adoption of policy 6113, parent-teacher conferences. That the Board of Education adopt policy 6113, parent-teacher conferences. Can I have a motion? Ms. Massacanelli, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, take it to the public. Any members of the public like to give comment on this? Seeing none, back to the board. All in favor? Motion carries 9-0. Okay, we are moving on to the first quarter financial report. Ms. Laborious?
Thank you, Ms. Vitale. The big picture on the first quarter financial report is that we have a projected gap of about $880,000, mainly due to, as discussed earlier, a higher than projected number of outplaced students, as well as the increased services and special ed related services. The special education gap is about $2.3 million. After offset, but there are savings in personnel and benefits and lower than expected enrollment in magnet schools and some minor savings in maintenance and operations that result in that net $880K balance. And so I would just ask that you look at the front page of the first quarter summary. And I do apologize. I'm not sure why, but the bottom section seems to have gotten cut off, so I will have to send you an updated version. the summary sheet is something that's new. I did present this for the financial close at the Finance Committee for fiscal 2021. And this is, the top is a summary of the projected balances, and the bottom is intended to be a full summary of the unencumbered balances, which are 2 reports that we have consistently been giving you. But this is just sort of a high-level snapshot summary to be able to continue to go back into the detail, which I'll do in a moment. And so we typically present the projected balances because that's meaningful to keep track of where we anticipate that will be at any given point in the year. And what we'll do is continue to update this each quarter so we can really easily see what's changed from quarter to quarter. And then the bottom is the unencumbered balance. We typically look at that at this point in time. So September 30th, for example, is our first quarter financials compared to the previous year at the same point in time. So we can see if our cash flow looks similar. It's meaningful only if the board has questions, but we're just showing it as a summary because that's the report we've given to you from our financial system. So this high-level summary is showing a balance, projected balance in personnel services. But if you look down below, the unencumbered balance, for example, is about 5.9. And that's mainly because we don't encumber, for example, all of our part-time staff at the start of the year. So that's just giving an example. In addition, you know, in the benefits and the fixed charges, you would see a large unencumbered balance at this point in time because we don't encumber our full, for example, health insurance benefits. We do that as the bills come in. So that's the big picture. We anticipate that this can be mitigated by potential savings with utilities and in transportation and possibly also in health insurance, and I'll go into that when we go into the details. We'll have a better look at where we are in relation to those pieces and know whether or not this is more concerning by Q2, but at this point in time, it's something that we do anticipate that we'll be able to mitigate until we get additional information to say otherwise. And so I would just have you turn to the next report, which is the projected balance report. And this is something that you had seen before. I just formatted it slightly differently. And so this gives a little bit more detail. So for example, the personnel services ties up to the line in the first report that you saw, but this is showing some additional detail. So it shows, for example, our budget is $119,000, and then you can see the projected balances next to that. I didn't include notes, but in future, I suppose I should. Probably be helpful to have the notes next to the dollars. I'll go through them now briefly. So the total personnel is projected to be about $454,000. The bulk of that being in the staff replacement because we had 5 additional retirees, more than we projected. You know, which is unfortunate for the district, but it's good from a financial standpoint because we see savings when we have the retirees. And then a little bit greater than anticipated turnover that we're projecting, unfortunately. And then you see a negative in the subs. That's because we were using a 4-year average, but as Mr. Cummings mentioned earlier, likely to see a bit of savings there. This is just a really conservative number because we used a 4-year average, but the real experience this year is, unfortunately, we have some savings on the subs line, likely we'll see in Q2. And then, so those are the big picture items. The net is $434,000. The fixed charges, it's driven by what's happening on the personnel side. Since we have a little bit greater turnover, meaning a little bit longer time of vacancy, there's projected to be a bit of savings on the health insurance. Also, because when we project, we do based on, you know, family size assumptions because we have single, 2, and then family insurance. And, you know, we want to be a little bit conservative because life events will happen throughout the year. So we're projecting based on specific life events. So that's the fixed charge. Mainly it's the savings in health insurance and FICA and Medicare. And the pupil personnel expenses, we have a large gap of about $2.5 million in SPED expenses. That's as Mr. Mancusi mentioned earlier. We currently have 80 outplacements. This includes a projected additional 5, and we have 56 settlements, so this includes a projected additional 10 based on trending that happened in previous years and what they know of the student population at this point in time. And last year, as Mr. Mancusi mentioned, we ended with 79 and 62, but that doesn't mean that's the annual average from last year. So our budget estimate didn't predict the level of need for outplacement and for the outplacement and also the settlement agreements. The projection includes an assumption about revenues, including Medicaid, IDEA, excess cost. Our excess cost revenues last year dropped by 15%, and it's likely to go down again this year. Unfortunately, our per pupil expenditure is high, which means that when our per pupil expenditure is high, we get a lower margin of reimbursement from the state because it's anything in excess of those costs that we get reimbursed. And the state establishes a percentage. Right now, we're assuming 74%. It could go as high as 79%, and so we'll have that adjusted in Q2 and have a more realistic look at the excess costs at that point in time. And then it's offset by some savings that we're seeing in pupil transportation. Some of that is real savings that we saw over the summer because youth didn't ride the buses this past summer, that they took advantage of the ESY program, but they didn't ride transportation. So there was some savings there. So net in pupil personnel right now, we're looking at a projected $2.2 million gap, which is mostly what's driving the gap that we have in the bottom line. Support expenses is mainly driven by the magnet school tuition. We have lower than projected kids utilizing the magnet schools, which is resulting in savings in the budget because we're not having to pay those tuitions. They're staying in district. That negative that you see in security expenses is going to be mitigated because there's revenues that aren't reflected there for the parking garage that we use to offset the security line. Maintenance and operations, we have about $200,000. It's small for the total maintenance and operations budget. If we come to the second quarter and we still see a trend in less revenues than we projected in SPED, or something else anomalous that happens that doesn't give us the savings we hope in utilities, we may have to freeze maintenance and operations. Some of the accounts for some projects. We'll bring it back to the board, obviously, before we do, but we're hopeful that we won't have to do that. And then Mr. Cummings was happy to see, and I think Mr. Peterson will be happy to see, we have some savings in copier services that we're hoping to carry forward in some plans that we'll present to you as part of the budget as well to see further savings next year. We're trying to reduce paper and be green. And then, so in capital outlay, we typically, I think you know this, hold school equipment purchases till end of year so we can see how our budget's doing. So right now, I'm not projecting major savings there, but if we needed to, we could go to that to utilize to offset some of the needs that we have now. So thank you. And are there any questions through the chair?
Mr. Peterson?
Hi, thank you for this. I really enjoy the new format, particularly the longitudinal look that we're going to get each quarter. I can see how that's going to really help us illustrate trends. Just to be very clear about one point, we're talking about in the major classifications projected as of 9/30/21. You're projecting a year-end balance based on where we were on 9/30, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Specifically to the line for SPED expenses, do you happen to know, and I should know this, in previous years, it looks like what you're doing is you're building in those 5 additional, it says 5 outplacements and 10 settlements. Have we built in that cushion in previous years when Doreen came to us with this? Would you know?
So they did the projections a bit differently in the past, resulting in a similar outcome, but it would modify throughout the year. So I did go back and look at a few years, and Mr. Mancusi and I spoke, as well as with a person that works with him on the projections. They wouldn't include the revenue projections at this point in time, so they'd show a really large gap because they would be showing you without the revenue, and I'm showing you with an assumption about the revenue. which will adjust for you also, and I can give you the numbers as we go along. They also did not include those projected additional placements that were to come throughout the year. And in addition, and this was, a collaboration with the finance director. This is the way she chose to present the information. In addition, they wouldn't show full spending of all the other sped accounts. Here, we're showing the full spending of what they need for all the materials and supplies that they need for special education services. So in addition, all the areas that we anticipate there will be gaps, so including the related services that Mr. Mancusi spoke of earlier, like the evaluations and psych and things like that.
I don't want to tie you to anything. Would it be fair to say that this is a more conservative estimate than we've gotten in previous years?
I do believe so.
Okay. You've been here long enough to know that especially other town bodies are sometimes perplexed at how our estimates for this line can be so off. But you're trying to adjust for that by projecting possible additional outplacements and settlements.
Correct. And where it changes, Mr. Mancusi and I are meeting regularly, so we'll be able to explain that to you because it will be something that's happened that's different than what we originally thought. So, yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
First reading of policy 3524, green cleaning program. Mrs. Maxinelli?
Just as always, this had been approved as a C19 policy, and we're now looking to make it permanent and remove it from the C19s. So as always, I'd welcome any questions in advance of the next meeting if possible.
Any questions now on this policy? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Approval to extend COVID-19 policies to January 30th, 2022. The Board of Education approve amending policy C19.1 to change the effective date up to and including January 30th, 2022. Can I have a motion? Mr. Asa, can I have a second? Ms. Gerber? Before we bring it to the board for discussion, Mr. Cummings, do you have some information to share?
Yes, thank you.
That might be pertinent to this vote.
Just a couple quick notes on this policy. Yes, the district is asking that this policy be extended to the end of January. I understand, I saw it on the paper today, and I could not find the original source, but there was some indication that the governor is contemplating that maybe he'd be able to end the mask policy early or the mandate early. I just want everybody to know that right now we are following the governor's executive order. If the governor rescinds that executive order, we're going to change our policy in response to that. The superintendent of schools in Fairfield is not interested in holding out on masks if the governor takes this away. I just want everybody to be assured of that. But at the very least, this would allow this to continue for the next couple months. And I think at this point, the policy, his mandate is due to expire in February, if I'm correct. But a couple of other pieces I want to add to this. So we are going to be sending information out. My plan is, our hope is for tomorrow anyway, addressing questions. We've received a number of questions about visitors and volunteers. So we are going to be opening up the schools for both visitors and volunteers. We just asked that visitors and volunteers wear masks at all times in the building. And as adults, they have to maintain that 6-foot distance like all the other adults currently in the schools. And again, as we've done in the past with both of those positions, we just asked that people notify the school if they're coming, if they're going to be reading to a class, the teacher would let the principal know. Just because one of the things we have to continue to kind of keep an eye on is just traffic and the amount of people in the building at any given time. But that will be happening as soon as we get the announcement out. That will be moving forward. So again, visitors and volunteers are going to be back in the schools as quickly as possible. And as everyone knows, the changes were made to Addendum 7 by the state. I think they got held up in the mail. But they are on track. So the music concert performance has been modified as a result of that change, and it's been published on the district website. It's available. I was at Fairfield Ludlow on Monday afternoon, and we were talking about possible ways the parents can be accommodated for candlelight. They're candlelight, right? Candlelight. Okay. I apologize. I get the C's mixed up there. And even how they're going to do the articulation concert for the rising the rising ninth graders, and how that's going to be arranged. So again, the music department is moving forward. You heard our students talk about the plays getting ready at Fairfield Ludlow. So again, the effort is to bring everything back as quickly as we can to normal, and as much as we can to normal. So I just wanted the board to know that as an information item.
Mr. Peterson.
I'm sorry, I meant to add this during the student presentation. Ward is also preparing a play, just for the week after the Ludlow play.
Okay.
So just so it's, I asked my child who is in the play, and I can't remember, and so I'm sorry about that. But I know they are practicing 3 days a week for it, and it's going to be the weekend before Thanksgiving, and so there you go.
I understand it's going to be great, though.
It is going to be fantastic.
Hopefully cheerier than Lord of the Flies. Sorry, Mr. Cummings. Mrs. Mascanelli.
I was just hoping, through the chair to Mr. Cummings, if you could speak to what the passing of, voting for this motion, what is it that it allows you to do? First of all, I'm delighted to hear that we're going to have parents and volunteers getting back in the schools. That's been much missed on so many ways. So I'm delighted to hear that. Obviously, we know that the facilities are increasingly being used. So what is in here? What is the latitude that you're asking for that the district needs this to be passed?
I think the ability that seemed, honestly, in past months, right, was the ability to be responsive to changes in the data, changes in the numbers, changes in the situation, the evolving science information, the medical information. I think a lot of that is stabilized, but for now, it continues to support. Essentially, if we did have to make any adjustments on very quickly, it would allow us to do so. One of the policies in there is obviously, and this seemed like I wouldn't say a greater reality a month ago, but the issues around if we had to do a school closure due to a exposure issue, or those are the types of things that it would give us some latitude to do that seem more and more less and less likely. But I maintain that caution is our best approach at this point. And hopefully this will be the last time we have to deal with these. I think we all welcome to close the door on these particularly when it's needed. The visitor issue, if changes happen to happen to the visitor, that type of thing, if the numbers started to rise, it would just give us some latitude to adjust those things.
Okay, and then in case, due to the surprise factor, anybody missed your statement regarding the possibility of action by Governor Lamont, I was hoping you could repeat what you just said earlier in case any members of the listening public missed what you said.
The part about not wanting to...
Yes.
Well, so I want to make it really clear that if the governor lifts the mask mandate, we as the Fairfield Public Schools, we've followed him before, we would follow him there too, and we would lift our mask mandate.
Ms. Jacobson.
The first thing is on September 24th, when we first extended these till right now, I had sent an email to you, Mr. Cummings, and to the members of the policy committee that C19.8 conflicts with 6999 now because we passed that subsequent to the extension of this policy. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the conflict and the suggested amendment that I had sent on that date to align 6999 and C19.8.
I'm sorry, Ms. Jacobson, you're going to have to remind me because I did not bring those notes.
Sure, no problem. So right now, C19.8 only affords for an absence due to quarantine or isolation, either excused or unexcused. After passing that, we later passed 6999 to afford the possibility of being present based on teachers evaluating students' work time, et cetera, et cetera. So we now have two different policies that guide that. And my suggestion at that time was that we cut and paste the last sentence of 6999 into 1619.8. Should everyone want to extend that?
That, yes, I apologize, I did forget, but that would be the answer. Those two policies do need to align.
So I don't know how Christine wants to do it, but would you like to make an amendment to C19.8 then?
Why don't we add an agenda item for that? Amend that policy and then vote on the date.
So you want me to make a motion to add C19.8? Did you read the motion already? Yeah, you did.
Did.
You take them separately.
Yeah.
We can take them. Yeah, but can I just ask her a question? Policy, a question. The COVID policies are in place, as you said, to provide flexibility. If you decide that this policy doesn't need, the COVID policy regarding attendance does not need to be in place, the SET policy would be the guiding policy. So I question, do we need to amend it if we just know that administration has the authority to decide we do not need to follow this particular COVID policy right now, we are just going to follow the SET policy?
Or we could just not move it forward. If we vote on them separately, we can just get rid of this because you already have the other one anyway. But either way you want to talk, we shouldn't pass knowingly conflictual policy, in my opinion.
I just wanted for clarification in terms of, we're even though we're potentially moving these forward, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to be followed. It provides flexibility to the superintendent and for the board in setting the date. Just heading into the holidays, not knowing what our meeting schedule is going to be, we want the superintendent to be operating under policies set by the board, which is why we put it to January. We don't have the January meeting schedule yet because that calendar hasn't been set. We didn't want to conflict with budget, so we put it towards January. Just a little bit of the backstory in terms of where the date came from. So why don't we can, Mr. Ace, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So two things. One, procedurally, can we not approve the motion as is, knowing that 6999 would supersede it? So I guess the question is, are you going to make a motion to split these up? Okay.
So, a motion to amend the motion to take each of these policies one by one. But if you want me to list them?
Well, do we have to do each of them one by one, or why don't we?
However you want to do it.
We're not voting on the policies, though.
That's why I don't want to take them one by one. Why don't we, can I table this? We'll table this motion.
Except that they're going to expire.
And we can take it up, we can handle that, and then we can pick it up again after we vote on the amendment. Okay, so we'll table this motion. Could I have a motion to table? Okay, so, Mr. Telly?
I just have a comment not related to your motion and tabling. And just because I feel I have to say it, to your point before about the masks and the governor, I just am really uncomfortable with it's up to the governor, it's up to the governor. Well, the governor would be more likely to expedite changing the mask mandate if those in leadership positions advocated for why it's so desperately needed to change. And for all the reasons I reported before, we're in now a declaration of a national state of emergency for our children's mental health. I don't know what more could possibly be needed to prove that this needs to change immediately for our children. And I just needed to say it one more time.
Thank you, Ms. Rotelli. Can I have a motion to table? Mrs. Gerber, second. Mr. Asa, all in favor of tabling this? Ms. Rotelli, motion to table this? Motion carries 9-0. Ms. Jacobson, can you make a motion to add your suggested amendment, add an item to the agenda?
I would like to move to make a motion to add an item to the agenda to amend C19.8 on attendance.
Can I have a second to that? Mr. Peterson, all in favor of adding this to the agenda? Motion carries 9-0. Make a motion to amend it now?
So, I don't know, does anyone we don't have it in front of us, but at the end of the C19.8 where it goes into, I'm just going to add the following sentence to the bottom of C19.8, which aligns with...
I'm sorry, you need to make the motion?
Okay.
So I just want to make sure, just let me know when you're making the motion before you start discussing the details of it.
All right. I'm making the motion to amend C19.8 to read, teachers will review student work. Hold on. / or virtual attendance in class and determine if the students...
Is this not written down anywhere to be handed to the secretary?
Well, you can just copy and paste 6999, the last sentence. Okay, I can read it to you. Or I can email it to you.
Colleen, do you have the policy that you could read? Or can I trouble?
That's what it says.
It is a full-page policy. $699. So just to repeat, you do not have a written copy for the secretary. She is having to take this from dictation right now.
It's one, yeah, yes. I brought this up to you on the 24th.
Mrs. Jacobson, this was your responsibility to bring the language for the amendment.
Ladies, please, please. We don't need to...
right.
We don't need to raise our voices over this. We can talk it through. The amendment to add that copy at the end of the policy.
Public, do if you want me to. Yes? In case there's comment?
Yes.
Thank you. Teachers will review student work and or virtual attendance in class and determine if the student's excused absence will be changed to present. Which just brings it in line with that policy.
Can I have a second?
Can I ask that you move the period at the end of that sentence inside the quotation mark?
Do you object to that, Ms. Jacobson? Okay. All right. Mr. Peterson gave the second. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, we'll take it to the public. If any public comment on the amendment or this motion, actually it's a new motion. Seeing none, back to the board. All in favor of amending?
Can you please just repeat to me exactly the wording of your motion at the start? I got the verbatim because I just copied it from the website, but if you could just repeat, please, the first part of your motion.
The motion is to amend policy C19.8 on attendance to include the last sentence from policy 699. 6999.
And where exactly in C19.8 is this going?
Right after where it talks about attendance, the absence for isolation and quarantine.
Where is that in the policy?
That's at the bottom.
C19.8? So it's at the end of C19.8. Because I don't have that in front of me either. So I'm just trying to find out where I need to put this, because it has to be in the motion.
Yes.
You're talking
in the
about
highlighted yellow part, yes.
So just to be clear, it is at the end of the highlighted part.
Yes.
So it reads, the board will review any and all guidelines issued by the State Department of Education regarding attendance requirements, including during periods of blended learning and regarding attendance requirements of students who choose not to participate. And then it would read, teachers will review student work and/or virtual attendance in class to determine if the student's excused absences will be changed to present.
This is not.
This is.
Can. Can I have the board's unanimous consent to take a 3-minute recess? Seeing any objection? Seeing none? All right. We're back. All right. Back to the motion.
We have the motion, it's just the location. It was put at the bottom of C19.8.
Do you have it, Ms. Scribble?
Yes.
Do you want to?
The motion is to amend C19.8 C on attendance to include the last sentence from 6999. Quote, teachers will review student work and/or virtual attendance in class to determine if the student's excused absences will be changed to present. And just to clarify, I don't know if you want to include this in the motion as well, but if I am correct, what you want to do is for C19.8C, will now read, if a student is unable to attend class in person due to health department directed quarantine or isolation, they are encouraged to participate from home, but they will be marked absent from class. The absence will be excused if a parent guardian notifies the school's absentee line. Otherwise, the absence will be unexcused. Teachers will review student work and/or virtual attendance in class to determine if the student's excused absences will be changed to present. It will then follow with the sentence, teachers will review student work and/or virtual attendance in class to determine if the student's excused absences will be changed to present.
Yes, thank you.
All in favor? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Picco, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxcanelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Guernsey. All opposed? Ms. Gerber, abstentions? Ms. Vitale. Motion carries 7-1-1. Okay. Back to, we'll pick up the other one off the table. Losing it here. That the Board of Education approve amending policy C19-1 to change the effective date up to and including January 30th, 2020. 22. I want to go back. All in favor? Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxincanelli, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Guernsey. All opposed? Mrs. Rotelli, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Pitko. Motion carries 6-3. Thank you. Approval of minutes. So the Board of Education approved the 10/12/2021 regular meeting minutes. Can I have a motion? Ms. Pitko, second. Mr. Asa, any discussion? All in favor? Minutes pass 9-0. Superintendent's report. Mr. Cummings.
All right, just a couple items tonight. One is I've given you the district improvement plan update. It's a status update where we are. In the board packet tonight was a memo that is drafted for not only members of the Board of Education, but Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the members of the RTM. Essentially an update on where the DIP steering committee is right now. As stated in the memo, they have spent quite a bit of time meeting every 2 to 3 weeks. They've reviewed the data that we've collected over the past since really late winter, early spring, identified the core issues that was contained in that survey data. This was the thought exchange data and other surveys that the district had, the climate surveys that the district conducted, identified those 4 key areas around academic achievement, the social emotional learning, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the idea of how we have to improve our communication, goal around communication. The goals right now, I can't emphasize this enough. The goals are in draft form. The committee worked to build those goals. We expect that they may change as we move forward. We look at the data, we refine those goals. But these are the 5-year draft goals. These are not the individual years. We expect that for each year under the 5-year plan, specific goals will be developed to lead to the outcome of the broad goal being achieved. And then corresponding action steps will be developed as well. As I've said to the board from the beginning, as we develop these action steps, these goals, these action steps will also be developing and including for the board's approval, preliminary budget figures for each of the 5 years going forward. So that's essentially where we are. Once I've put the committee on hold pending this conversation, once the board has spoken tonight, we'll then bring this, we'll send the full memo to those other town bodies. We're going to reconvene the committee. We're going to organize into 4 work groups. One of the struggles the committee has had, quite honestly, is getting people to attend the meetings between the staff in the late afternoon, and it's not convenient necessarily for parents, but if you move to the evening, then you lose the staff. So our hope is that we'll take advantage of an online learning environment, essentially, to create work in 4 small groups, develop these goals more fully, and then our plan is, after the board has adopted a budget for 22-23, bring to you the first iteration of the draft DIP for your consideration in February. Turn that back out then with your input for community approval, make refinements, and bring it to the board for final approval in either the last May meeting or the June, well, the last May meeting and then the first June meeting, so that it is ready to go for July 1st of 2022. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Mrs. Maxincanelli.
So thank you for the update, and thank you for the reminder that one big change for this district improvement plan, this iteration, is the idea of attaching the budget numbers to it. I think that's something that other town bodies were very pleased to hear was part of our plan. The one thing that, for me, is glaringly missing is that nowhere in here do we have actual achievement, measurement of achievement. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yes, I will. The first goal 1 was the one that collectively we wrote, you know, kind of to get the format, and then we broke into 3 or smaller groups, and the other 3 goals were developed. And it was late a few Mondays ago, and everybody went home. And then as we went back and looked at these, that first goal stands out because it's really, it's a goal that will achieve that is needed to achieve the academic achievement, if that makes sense. It's a structure that will support improving academic achievement. So the goal that I think is most ripe, that has to essentially be rewritten, is that first goal, that academic achievement goal. The goal that's on academic achievement, so that one is in the form of a SMART goal, and two, it speaks directly to the issue of students' achievement. So that one would be the first thing up for consideration as that group moves forward.
Thank you.
Ms. Jacobson.
In similar vein to that comment and question is, I was wondering if the committee was provided the very thoughtful indicators from 2015-2020 plan at the end that are around achievement, where we had a 2015 baseline, a 2020 goal. Was that updated with the actual numbers, met, not met, and was that provided to the committee as a launching pad?
The data sets at the end? No, the committee has seen the current plan, but that data has not been updated, I would say, probably in 3 or 4 years. I don't think that data.
Well, it was just we had a 15 baseline, right?
Yep.
So under Dr. Title, then it was going to be the 2020 goal. Did we meet those or not?
Yeah, I honestly do not even know. I don't think that data was updated. Well, I will tell you, there were problems with that data set to begin with, because data was identified that hadn't even been effectively measured at that point. For instance, there's a whole bank of writing goals that there was no effective measure on when the data was created. There's a lot of inherent problems with that 15-20 data set. And one of the inherent problems with it is it's immense. I think I mentioned it here, and if I didn't, I apologize, but I know I've said it to the board before. One of the guiding principles that this District Improvement Steering Committee has is that they recognize, and I shared with them the information I had shared with the board around the past 5 years of district improvement plans and goals and what was actually achieved and not achieved. So as a result of that, they want to, there's a desire to focus the goals. We talk about budgeting money. They also want to be mindful of budgeting time to make sure that the goals are achievable in the time that we have to do them. So one is limiting the amount of goals to be a more realistic set of goals, and two, connected to that, is having a data set that we can build essentially data tables to collect that information as we go along, so that the data reporting process is as seamless as possible. And under that last district improvement plan, the data reporting process, and I think quite honestly the reason it never came to fruition was it was a major task in itself, and people just didn't have the time to do it. That they want to avoid that to begin with, because they didn't feel that that was an effective way to
No, it was a lot. It was like 10 pages, but it was like, I mean, it's a lot, but I would just say that for number one, if that's where you see this achievement information falling, that we need to be mindful of our accountability index, and those items are not here, and those were in the 15-20.
That's correct. And I think that, Ms. Jacobson, to that point, I think that the data that in 15, we were relying on producing a lot of that data. The state now is producing a lot of that data for us, and we should take advantage of that.
So that's just my comment, is to make sure that those are in there. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, moving on. Substitute staffing report. Ms. Deasy?
Sorry. I know that there's been a number of questions and concerns around the substitute report, so we started to dive a bit into the data, and Ms. Deasy worked on that. Before we do this, I just want to thank our administrators and teachers. We've reached out to get some understanding from the staff at the building level, the impact of this. I will tell you that for our middle school assistant principals and our EPFs and principals at the elementary level, our house principals at the secondary level, the substitute staffing shortages is a continual level of concern, right? I want to know, people understand this, they're fully committed to making sure that there's a teacher in front of every classroom. Sometimes that's not been possible. But the administrators have gone in to teach classes as a result of this. They've moved people around. We were doing walkthroughs at Fairfield Ludlow today, and there were teachers in classrooms who were covering for other teachers who happened to be out. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I know their day begins particularly early to make this happen, and it ends honestly late at night. Sunday night, I think for last year it was quarantine issues. This year it's substitutes. It's really taking a lot of time out of the administrators' days, and the teachers. And I want to just thank them and the teachers who've made a lot of work to cover their colleagues' classes. It's stretching people, right? This is another level of stress that's out in the district right now. So I just wanted to add the personal aspect of this before Ms. Deasy starts to talk about the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Thank you, Ms. Deasy, for doing this work.
My pleasure. So I did outline in the memorandum to the board several of the factors that are impacting our substitute work. And I think the most important chart that I provided is on page 3, which shows our fill rates for last fall, the fall of 2020, versus the fill rates for the fall of 2021, which is essentially how many of our teacher absences are not filled by substitutes, or what percentage are filled by substitutes. And so we see that there is a steady decline, but we are still filling. So far in October, as of last Friday, we filled almost 1,200 vacancies. So there is a great deal of work, as Mr. Cummings said, that goes into that. We are filling a lot of vacancies every day, but it is only a 64% rate due to the factors that are outlined. So I'm happy to answer any questions or to get any additional data that the board might be interested in.
Mr. Peterson.
Thanks for this report. One thing that I'm not seeing, and I had asked Dr. Parrish about this at the end of the last meeting, is there, the chatter is that Ludlow is having much harder time with substitutes than Ward, and that there's a disparity there. Have you been seeing that in the trends?
I don't have that data available, but so far, no, that has not been the experience.
I don't have it right in front of me, but I did look at that, Mr. Peterson, and this is going off memory, but Fairfield Ward actually had a lesser fill rate than Ludlow, if I remember right. And this was a September and October combined. Ludlow was 63% and Ward was 55%.
I guess just to follow up, I'm obviously concerned about the equity issue. If there's a consistent disparity between one high school and another, I think, I don't know what levers you have to pull to address that, but that was something that I know that's on the public's mind.
Any other questions about this? Mrs. Maxcanelli.
The other thing that we're hearing a lot about is, I think people understand they're not happy, but they understand if you can't get a sub, you can't get a sub. But that there is extremely uneven expectations or communication regarding, well, what then is supposed to happen? And that there has been very inconsistent posting to Google Classroom, et cetera. So can you speak to, in the situation where we are unable to get a sub, what is the expectation? What should parents and children be able to count on? And that if it doesn't happen, it is appropriate to reach out to a building administrator.
Mr. Cummings, I don't know, maybe you want to handle that instead of Ms. Deasy. Sounds like more of a...
Yes, I can handle that. So the expectation when somebody's out, if there's a planned absence, right? I know I'm going to be out in the next couple of days. For a planned absence, there's an expectation that a teacher would prepare lesson plans in advance and have those available for students. We also expect that teachers will have a set of emergency plans if they're going to be out and they don't have time to prepare lessons in advance, right? for whatever the reason might be, either too ill or something happened at home, whatever it might be. There should be an emergency set of plans. That's a longstanding expectation, and honestly, pretty much every district that I know of, that's the expectation. So if that's not happening, and we will review this with our administrators, again, that really should be the expectation to make sure that that's happening. And if people feel that that students were inadequately prepared or that nothing was left for students to do, then I think it's a conversation. They certainly are welcome to let the administrator know that something wasn't there. But that is a longstanding expectation.
We're nearing the witching hour for the board. Can I just ask any members of the public planning on giving public comment at the end of the meeting? Can you just raise your hand? Okay. Thank you. Seeing none, we will move on with the agenda. Committee liaison reports. Ms. Rotelli?
Yes, SEPTA is having another meeting, our October meeting tomorrow night, 7:30. It's virtual, so just go to fairfieldsepta.org for the link. And I just want to say it was great to have our first meeting in person at Ward. And I'm very sorry I was unable to go, but I hear it was a great success, SEPTA's trunk or treat that happened this past Sunday at North Stratfield. And thank you to everyone, and there was a lot of you in this room who showed up and maybe decorated your cars. Mr. Papa George and Mr. Mancusi. It was much appreciated, and everybody had a great time, so thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
First, I'd like to make a motion to extend the meeting to 11:05. I have an open board comment that I'll try to keep brief.
Can I have a second to that? Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, all in favor of extending the meeting to 11:05? Ms. Guernsey, Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, Mr. Asa, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Rotelli, opposed. Ms. Pitko, motion carries 8-1. Mr. Peterson, floor is yours.
I'll go on briefly. Board of Finance, at the last meeting, Angeles gave a very compelling presentation, and they voted in favor of the Roger Ludlow roofing project and the additional money for planning for other projects. Finance Committee, we met on the 13th. The big thing that happened at this meeting was we met with Mike Zuba, who was the demographer that we dealt with at Milona McBroom. He now works for the SLAM Collaborative. And we had a wide-ranging discussion about whether or not the projections that we got in February 2020, March 2020, were still going to hold up given current real estate trends. He was going to do some research and get back to us about that. We exchanged some thoughts about what we're seeing on the ground, what we're hearing from parents, what we're seeing in terms of development around town. So he was going to give us an update. And we'll be discussing that further at our next meeting, which I believe is on the 3rd, so next week. But no decisions were made, no votes were taken. It was just a discussion about whether or not we needed to have an additional study done.
Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli.
And then for RTM, after the approval by the Board of Finance, that the RTM unanimously approved moving forward with Roger Ludlow as well.
Thank you both. Any other? Mrs. Gerber.
Due to conflicting schedules, I haven't been able to make it to the most recent Mill Hill Building Committee meetings, but I have been in touch with Mr. Lee, the chair of the committee, and he said that he asked that I share that the final part of the school is scheduled to be done at the end of October, which is now, and that the portables will be removed next month.
Thank you. I attended the PTA Council Roundtable workshop. Ms. Pitko had to work, so I filled in for her. It was really just great connecting with the PTA reps again and hearing their feedback. And Mr. Cummings, I think that based on the feedback we received at that meeting, they'll be very happy to hear that visitors are allowed back in the building officially, because the what happens in the classroom between teacher and student is vitally important, but parents play a vital role in that, and I think that any support that we can give and have parents back in the building, we've greatly appreciated. One comment remind me to follow up about just visits to middle school for parents that have not had an opportunity to visit. Now that visitors are allowed, might be nice just to offer that opportunity to new families for tours if they so desire. And with that, we will take it to open board comment. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, and thank you for your indulgence. I don't know if you people who may have known her heard this, but Mary Kay Frost died yesterday. While I will always think of her as the mother of my buddy Steve, a lot of you may know her directly or indirectly as the co-founder of the High School Scholarship Foundation of Fairfield, which since 1989 has given out more than $2 million in scholarship money to Fairfield students. She died after a long battle with cancer, but even during her battle with cancer, she was working with the High School Scholarship Foundation. I had the great fortune and honor to get to know her well as an adult, and I just wanted to say that I think the town is poorer for her loss.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Any other open board comment? Wanted to reiterate, SEPTA trunk and treat was a lot of fun. It was nice to see so many staff there. Thank you for attending. And also, just for the board, a little bit of housekeeping. For the future, if you have an amendment that you would like to put forward, this goes for everybody, please bring it just in writing just to make our meetings go a little bit more quickly. It'll make it easier for everybody, especially our secretary. So thank you, Mrs. Gerber and Mr. Peterson and everyone for helping getting the language on that. And with that, a motion to adjourn. I'll ask again. Sorry. Any public comment? Seeing none? Motion to adjourn. Ms. Rotelli, Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Pitko. In favor. We are adjourned.